ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ರಿ, ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ರಿ. Yes. Wait, I need to mute the screen. You're speaking now? There will be echo. Yes, you can speak now. Mute and speak. ಏನ ಚಾಲು ಆಗ್ಲತ್ತದ್ರಿ. ಇನ್ನ ಚಾಲು ಆಗ್ತದ. ಚಾಲು ಐತಿ ಫಂಕ್ಷನ್. ಹರಿಸ್ತಾರಿ. ಇಲ್ಲಪ್ಪ, ನಾ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಲೈವ್ ಕೊಡ್ಲತ್ತೀವಲ್ಲ, ಇಲ್ಲಿದ್ದೇನೆ ಒಳಗೆ. ಹರಿಸ್ತಾರಿ, ಫಂಕ್ಷನ್ ಚಾಲು ಐತಿ. ಲಂಚ್ ಟೈಮ್ ತನ ಆಗ್ತದ. ಅದೇ ಅದು ಮುಗಿಬೇಕಲ್ಲ, ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ನನಗೆ ಟೈಮ್. ಎರಡೂವರೆ ತಾಸು ಆಗ್ತದೆ. ಸರಿ ಸರಿ. Mute. Mic is muted.
Muted, sir.
Yes.
Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor R Naik is also taking vacation. Welcome, Mr. Hartley. I request Dr. Lakshmi to welcome the Vice Chancellor. Welcome, sir. Our Registrar, Professor Mushtaq Patel is also taking vacation. I request Professor our Registrar to the program. Welcome, sir. Component examination. The secretary is also making vacation and joining us today. I request Dr. Rajendram to come forward and welcome Professor Keru. Welcome, sir. Finance Officer of Central University of Karnataka, Dr. Shivanand is also making vacation. I request Dr. Babu sir to come forward and welcome Finance Officer Dr. Shivanand sir. Welcome, sir.
See, audio and video is correct.
All the technical team, all the teaching and non-teaching members of the university, and students, and all many other people, all the national patriotic people are organized here. It is a grand moment for us. It's a moment of pride for Central University of Karnataka that we are able to dedicate this emblem, the symbol of the nation, to the nation. We are dedicating the national flag on this auspicious occasion. I welcome you all once again, and we shall start the program with the Gandhi Legends. I request Dr. Jawaharlal and team to take it forward.
Find on YouTube. Volume low. ಅದು ದೊಡ್ಡನ್ನೇ ಇಟ್ಟು ಟೈಮ್ಲಿ ಹಂಗೆ ಚೆಕ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋತಿರ್ಬೇಕು.
Yes, Mr.
Thank you, Dr. Jayadeva University and team from the Department of Performing Arts and the University of Karnataka for the wonderful rendition of Gandhi legends and evoking the right moment of the day. Now I request Professor Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Maheshwaraiah to come forward and hoist the flag and do the honor, sir.
Shall I mute? Shall I mute? Yeah, I muted.
Karnataka, dedicated the 100th monument to the national flag to the nation about this 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi International Non-Virus to signify and promote global peace and harmony.
Sorry. Sir, if Vice Chancellor is speaking now, you need to call them, ask them to unmute and speak. Unmute. Because huh? They have to unmute. I have muted. No, I cannot unmute. They have to unmute. ಸರ್ ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಮೈಕ್ ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿನ ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ನಿಮ್ಮದು ಹಾಂ 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 ಎಸ್ ಎಸ್ ಇಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಕಮಿಂಗ್ ಲೈವ್ ಇಫ್ ಸರ್ ವೈಸ್ ಚಾನ್ಸಲರ್ ಮಾತಾಡುವಾಗ ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಓಕೆ ಓಕೆ
यमुना गंगा उज्जल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभाषित मागे गाहे तव जय गाथा जनगण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे Thank you, Vice Chancellor, sir. It is a pride moment for the Central University of Karnataka as the citizens of this nation that we are part of this moment when we are dedicating this national flag to the nation. Now I request Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor H. Maheshwaraiah to inaugurate the session and give his speech.
Not getting. Ashok. नहीं आ रहा. ओ सर का यूज करो. Some other. You want me to come? Okay, I'll come. Whoever is there, admit. That's it. Nothing else.
To the nation to signify and promote a global peace and harmony. Today, on the occasion of 151st Gandhi Jayanti, we are remembering Mahatma Gandhi with humbleness and pride. October 2nd is observed as an International Day of Non-Violence since 2007. It is a privilege that we are born and live in the nation that produced the great soul like Mahatma Gandhi. His principle of high value for truth, love for humanity has been guiding light for the nation. In current pandemic situation, Gandhian ideas of peace, non-violence, and resilience becomes all the more relevant for the whole human race. Modern India contribution to the humanity is undoubtedly the concept of non-violence. This principle is inherent in its culture, but it was the intervention of Mahatma Gandhi that brought the principle into the heart of political activism, even while facing the most powerful opposition of the colonial British rule, staying firmly truthful to the truth, unconditionally committed to the love for human and living simplest possible life. Gandhiji has set the ideal before us, preaching the principle that believed and practiced the same in day-to-day life. Mark Gandhi's class apart from other leaders or thinkers. Apparently, his principles and guidance are not limited to India, but to the whole. Hence, said, his life is the message. It is up to us how we imbibe these ideals. But undoubtedly, any individual who aspires to be a better citizen and try to be help to the society cannot reach the goal without borrowing from Gandhiji. He has laid a path for individual principles and can collectively build a better nation. Let us take this opportunity to explore and follow the ideas set by father of our nation and contribute our bit towards the nation building. Gandhian principles are relevant globally and will remain so as long as the idealism human society of equality is attained. In the world order that steady progress towards widely inequality and anarchy, perhaps the best ideal from Gandhiji that the world must now embark on will be the nature has enough to satisfy everyone, not need, but not his greed. It is a good beginning to network with the scholars of Gandhi. Now we will start the academic initiative hereafter. I wish all the best the Gandhi webinar. We are organizing the Gandhi webinar. One scholar from America already joined, another scholar from Sri Lanka, and many scholars from India that are participating in the webinar. I congratulate the Department of the social work, Professor the R.V. Channaveer and his team. I'm happy to inaugurate this the webinar. Here I remember the great help rendered by Romate John. Uh, because of his initiation, we could able to do this, and many of them has worked very hard. My registrar, my Vice Chancellor, and all, even Devendra also, they worked day and night from past 1 month. So to have this national flag in the campus. So this is a very bright moment for all the Central University faculty, both teaching and non-teaching students and all. This is a happy moment, a very big, very happiness. I'm inaugurating the webinar and also this flag mosque. And also, I'm very happy to tell you here, the Hyderabad, the industry, the mosque and the flag industry. So they are the responsible for this one because we have national tender. So they took this adventure and they have done it. I congratulate them. So they're working from past 10 days. So he's my friend and his team also working for this one. So once again, I thank you all for this one, participating in this wonderful, memorable the event. Thank you very much. Oh, the Srikanth particularly, who did this work, is from Hyderabad. He did a lot of work from past, 10 to please, Mr. Srikanth, from past 15 days when he was working here. Thank you, Srikanth. Okay, okay, I will give. So not only Srikanth and his team, the senior were here.
Thank you, Professor Maheshwaraiah. It was a very provoking speech for all of us and inspiring to become better citizens. On this occasion, we have a special speaker today. We are joined by Hana Mahagankar, a living follower of Gandhi, and she will be sharing some thoughts with us. Good morning, everybody. I am Ahana Mahagankar. Today, I'm going to tell a speech about Mahatma Gandhi ji. Respected Vice Chancellor, teachers and dignitaries, and bias. We celebrate Mahatma Gandhi ji Jayanti is the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi ji. We celebrate this occasion every day, every year. Mahatma Gandhi ji followed simple living and high thinking. He also followed non-violence and growth. He is our father of nation. Thank you. Thank you, Ahana, for that presentation. We are actually inspired from you. So, with this, we are going to the first session of today's program. Now we will be moving on to the webinar. It will continue on online and others will be joining us on the seminar hall. Once again, thank you everyone on the respected dignitaries their sheer national pride. I thank one and all who have assembled here Thank you once again.
None from there? No, no. Video will be there. I'll mute. Sir? Ah, fine, fine, fine. Okay. Okay. Fine, fine, fine. They're closing from there? Ah, you can continue. What's next? Hmm. Okay.
Where should I speak? There or here? Is this on?
Huh? You want to do anchoring? ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದನೇ ಮಾತಾಡ್ರಿ ಚಿತ್ಕಲ್ಲ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕಿಂಗ್ ದೇರ್ ನೋ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಸ್ಟಾರ್ಟ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಹಿಯರ್ ಓನ್ಲಿ ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಸಿಟ್ wait just change the camera.
This was this. That's it. The question.
Am I audible?
Sir, mic.
Wait.
This mic.
First we start with the dawn, no? Yes. It will be late for you. Yes.
Good morning, everyone on the online platform. First of all, apologies for the delay in starting the session. I extend hearty welcome to all the participants and the dignitaries on the webinar. We are today joined by Dr. F McAvinchey, joined from USA, Dr. Christlin Rajendram from Sri Lanka, Professor Rakesh Batabayal from Jawaharlal University, New Delhi, and Dr. Sebastian Joseph from Union Christian College, Aluva, Kerala. On this platform today we have participants from different parts of the country, including students, teachers, activists, and a wide variety of listeners. So it is indeed a great moment that we are going to have very, very enriching sessions listening to 4 distinguished speakers. First of all, we will start the program. We'll start the program with the lecture by Dr. Donald McAvinchey. The speaker is, he is a clinical social worker by profession, but he chose the profession as an instinct and to make his instinct official and more extendable to the society. He holds a master degree in social work in 1986 from the University of Michigan School of Social Work. Since then, his emphasis has been on family therapy and empowerment, working with African American, Native and Latino families, and also towards narrative therapy. He has been working in different platforms including performance, theatre, etc. We are very glad that you stay with us for so long, even though it is late hours. I request Dr. Donald McAvinchey to deliver his lecture on My Friend Mahatma Gandhi, How the World's Greatest Peacemaker Saved My American Soul, and Bringing Gandhi to Life in Your life too. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, esteemed Adam and everyone who's here. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Sound is good?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Somebody's phone is right there into my ear. And Professor Sivamurti.
Yes, sir.
We're going to try the slides. Can we do those slides, or will we not be able to?
Yes, sir. Just. Sir, you can.
इंग्लिश कैसे साथी हाँ इंग्लिश करना गाना
You pin this slide, sir.
Great, sir.
Yes, sir. Just a minute, sir. One side, one side.
I can't hear anybody's response back to me.
We can see that. It's visible. It's
Yes, I couldn't hear that.
Sir, you pin first on first. Next to that.
Full screen, I guess, is what my next question is.
Just taking photo.
That would be okay.
ಎಲ್ಲರ ಫೋಟೋ ಐತಿ ತೆಗೀರಿ
Thank you.
ಎಲ್ಲರ ಫೋಟೋ ಐತಿ
Thank you.
ಹಾಂ ಒಂದು
And Professor Sivamurti, are you still there?
Yes, sir. You can see it.
ರೈಟ್
Already, you can see on the screen. Is that? You can start present.
All right, well, I would like to start, and thank you very much for having me. It's a great honor. I have had the privilege of being in India on 6 different trips, coming to places from Channaveer to the north, all the way to Bangalore in the south, many places in between, teaching and presenting Gandhiji's philosophy in modern life. So, even though it's from a distance, it's wonderful to see India again, to see Karnataka, to be here at the Central University of Karnataka. It's very wonderful for me, a great privilege and honor. So, just want to thank Dr. Channaveer, Dr. Sivamurti, Professor, I can't see the name, Professor Venkareddy, and the other people who are here, who I had a chance to meet briefly the other day. And but I wanted to present on a more personal view of Mahatma Gandhi in my own life, rather than a view of his movement or history, which all of you know far more about it than I do. I've studied diligently for many years now, on Gandhi's philosophy and the history of his life, his contribution both in your country, but also his contribution to my country through the civil rights movement and many other countries around the world where nonviolent, non-cooperation became the most successful way to have people, the people of any country who have put nonviolent, non-cooperation into practice, the most successful way to achieve their freedom. And it started with Gandhiji and with people before him. And it has become a very personal journey for me, and I wanted to speak on it from that perspective today, if that's all right. And that's why I titled it My Friend Mahatma Gandhi, because I feel in many ways that Gandhiji has become an integral part of my life. Consider myself to be a student of his philosophy. I wouldn't say that I'm a devout follower all the time of everything that he proposed, but certainly his philosophy has become a great movement in my own life. So I wanted to speak about him, if it's can have your permission, in this rather personal way today, but in a way where the philosophies and the stands and the positions that Gandhi took about life and person within the political has impacted me. So if we could have the next slide, sir. And so why Gandhiji? Gandhiji came into my life in 2006. And if you could have the next slide, perhaps. So many of you, I'm sure, knew that 9/11, which has become September 11th, become a rather important date in United States history since the attack that happened. But 9/11/2006 was the 100th anniversary of the birth of Satyagraha by Gandhi in South Africa. And in the movie Gandhi, for instance, that moment is portrayed where he merged the spiritual values that he held so dearly within his own Hindu and Jain history, his own philosophy, with politics, with social action, political movement, and pulled those together, and it was born there on September 11th in 1906 in South Africa. So many people around the world were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the birth of this movement of nonviolent non-cooperation. And I decided to do the same. I held a showing of the movie Gandhi at the Unitarian Church in my hometown of New Mexico. And about 45 people came. We had a wonderful conversation talking about what had happened with the invasion of Baghdad by the U.S. Army as in armed forces in retaliation for the attacks on our country in 9/11. That was a very divisive military action, and many people, me included, did not believe in that action. And so, as part of protests, I showed this film and had conversations about a nonviolent approach to the people who were fomenting this military action. So, if we could have the next slide. So the people at the church said, would you mind coming back? Because this was so successful, people were really interested in the topic. Would you mind coming back and doing a Sunday service for us? And I made a joke, and I said, well, sure, I'd be happy to come back. And since Mr. Gandhi and I had the same hairstyle, then I would just come back as him. And I made it as a joke. I didn't actually mean it. I thought it was a funny thing to say. And I had about 2 or 3 months to prepare for that event at the church. And so I thought, well, why not? Why not try to come and do a portrayal, like a theatrical portrayal of Gandhiji there at the church? And so I did, and it was a very, very moving event for me. People were crying and they were asking Gandhiji through me and staying in character, asking questions about their own lives and about politics. There was a gentleman who was 92 years old who had a resistor of World War II against the Nazis and had gone to prison for that. And he was inspired by Gandhi's teachings way back then in 1940. And he came up to me, he was there at the time, he was crying, and he said, "You just touched my heart so strongly and so deeply with your presentation of Gandhiji. You made him real in my life." This is from a 92-year-old man who was a conscientious objector of the war. So I did that event. And if you go to the next slide, what happened after that is people started asking me to come to peace festivals and peace rallies here in the United States, and I started to do that and would stand and talk and speak from Gandhi's perspective, dressed as Gandhi, as close as I could get here in the United States. And then I got an invitation to come to Chandigarh to an organization called Youth Sata that Pramod Sharma, the leader of Youth Sata, runs every year. It's the International Peace Festival for college students. And he said if I could get to India, he would take care of all of my travel to come to the conference and to speak. And so I did that. And that was my first trip to India in 2009. And that led to making many, many friends in India and really being touched by talking about Gandhi's philosophy as a white, blue-eyed man from the United States of America coming to India to talk about Gandhi's beliefs and Gandhi's ideas being brought into this modern time. So many people were very, very open and asked me to come to their cities, and I traveled around those 6 years. I joined many different programs and was able to be faculty at some university programs. I spoke at many universities there, in Bangalore and Delhi and other places, and very much enjoyed deeply my connection with the people of India. And it moved me in my own life, and very much changed my approach, not only to my political stance and how I thought of myself in my community, in my country, but also in my own internal life, softening me and having me become much more focused in the kind of compassion and love, himsa, that Gandhiji spoke of. This is a picture of me in Bangalore at a talk that I gave there in Bangalore. This wonderful host at a university there. If we could have the next slide. So in all these trips to India with people coming from all across the world to the International Peace Festivals, to the program with Global Citizens for Sustainable Development out of Bangalore, my friend Aluva runs that program. I've been invited to come all over the world to spread Gandhiji's message, and I look forward to being able to travel more and more once COVID-19 passes, and we're able to do that. I'm excited about the possibilities of continuing with that work and meeting more and more people, and advocating for nonviolent, non-cooperation as ways to approach political change when oppression is happening. Next slide. So I have three purposes today. Part of it is to share my own inspiration, which I hope I'm doing. That has literally changed my life in so many ways. And I hope to inspire each of you as we attend this webinar together. I'd love to be able to bring Gandhiji's life story alive with you. And I'll be sharing some pieces from his life as we continue on through this talk. And to see if that life story can be a story that perhaps in different ways maybe you have considered touches your heart and opens your heart up in ways that I think Gandhiji challenged us to do. And finally, the third purpose is that famous saying that Gandhiji said, "We must be the change that we wish to see in the world." I want to speak about that directly before we're through. Take on that idea that I think you'll find interesting. So those are my three purposes for today. We have the next slide. So what is Gandhiji's message? And is it possible from this wonderful, bumbling lawyer, ascetic, vegetarian, small little man who rose to such stature in the world, in your country, and I don't know if you know, but here in the United States, Gandhi is considered a great hero and a great inspiration for many of the movements that have happened here in our country, and are quite possibly about to start a few more. I was at a meeting today, a Zoom meeting for how to become politically active in stopping our current president from perhaps not acknowledging and giving if he fails to be reelected at the November election. So I will be actively engaged in nonviolent non-cooperation if that comes to that around our election. But the three pillars that I'd like to propose from Gandhiji's teachings are these. So next slide. The first one is that Gandhiji talked about and really became a living example of profound compassion. And the profound compassion that I want to point out to you is that many, many times in Gandhiji's life, from the time he was in South Africa, through all the hardships there in 25 years of South Africa of his life, he was beaten. He had his collarbone broken by someone who tried to kick him off of the stagecoach. He came back from a trip to India after having written a document about the mistreatment of the Indian people in South Africa. And a crowd met him at the dock coming off the ship. And they were trying to take him and tie him up to a tree and hang him. And a whole different kind of history would have happened if they would have been successful. Someone threw a brick at him that day and hit him in the head with a brick. He was in prison robbed at prison so many times, 6 years total in his life. But in all of those horrific events that he had to put up with himself personally, and of course thousands of people were injured and killed there in India, striving for freedom, and in South Africa. Gandhiji held a very fascinating and I think very revolutionary position that if we could show our own suffering to those who oppress us, that suffering would get them to reconsider us as fellow human beings. And that when people stop seeing a person that they're oppressing as less than them, and stop seeing the person that they're oppressing as the other, the unknown other, that they don't have to connect with their hearts. When they stop doing that, a great respect comes up in their hearts, in the oppressor's hearts. And they finally see this person that they're hurting so badly as an equal to them, as a human being, just the same as they are as a human being. Gandhi's profound compassion, to me, was that huge, incredibly strong belief that if he could just hold on long enough, that the people who were oppressing the Indian people in South Africa and in India, he could just hold on long enough for them to see the suffering, that their hearts would change. To me, that is a huge level of compassion. Because he didn't see them as enemies. He saw them as friends who had just not been connected strong enough in their hearts with each other to become the kind of friends that they could be. For me, in my work, my community action work, my clinical work that I do as a social worker, when I was a professor of social work, and all of these different roles that I've had. That profound compassion has been a leading piece of the sort of work that I do. And I have tried to incorporate it over and over again with the clients that I work with the community movements that we've tried to instill. And to know that if there are people objecting or people struggling, that compassion can help them. So the first pillar that I want to say is that this profound compassion that Gandhiji had, where people would ask him when he was injured, do you want to press charges against the person who injured you? And he would just say, no, they were doing what they thought was right, they were doing what they were instructed to do, I won't hold them accountable. That is a really incredible level of compassion and very inspiring to me. So the second pillar I want to talk about is the abiding courage that Gandhiji showed. If you think about going into a crowd where people are most likely trying to kill you, the British soldiers, the people of South Africa, people within India who objected to Gandhi's philosophy, there were almost always people who were willing to injure Gandhiji at different times of his political career. And part of what he did, from my view, is that he reached down within himself after being a lawyer who would get so flummoxed and so scared that he could not even talk. His jaw would actually lock up in the courtroom. He couldn't even speak. He was so filled with anxiety when it came the moment to be able to talk to the court. And he would actually run out of the courtroom scared and try to make it back to his office because he was so embarrassed and ashamed of it. It's when he was a young man, a young boy. To think of that young man transforming himself into a person who had so much courage that he would stand against the most powerful military force on the planet in the British Empire, the form of the British Empire back then. And to say, we want you to be friends, we want you to leave, and leave us alone to take care of our own country. Rather than get angry, rather than strike back, to have the courage to say to people with guns facing you, directly into you, it's okay. We love you, we hold you in our hearts. We just want you to let us have our own country back. There was a story of him going up into the hills to talk to a Sikh leader. And when he came to the camp of the Sikh leader grabbed Gandhiji by the throat and lifted him up off the ground and was trying to choke him just by holding him by his throat, squeezing. And Gandhiji didn't get flustered at all, even though he could have died in that moment. He just looked directly into that person's eyes and held that person with great courage, but also great love and compassion. That leader of the Sikhs saw that compassion and love in Gandhiji's eyes, set him down, and turned his whole paramilitary group into fighters for India's freedom through nonviolence. And he became a great follower of Gandhiji's. That kind of abiding courage was so incredibly powerful. That's the second pillar I wanted to speak to. And the third pillar is the idea of having an integrated life philosophy. But Gandhiji said, my life is my message. But if anyone wants to see what it is that my philosophy is, just observe my life. From that stance, that throughout every day, you practice and strove to be better and better as a person, to become more and more compassionate and loving, to follow the principles of ahimsa and satyagraha, to really dedicate his life day in and day out, not just with the larger political scene that he was involved in, but also at the ashrams that he led with his patriots, his family, He had many ups and downs in all of those attempts. I often talked about Kastabai as being one of his greatest teachers because she would help him to calm down, help him to slow himself, and to become more and more centered in this idea of integrating his life philosophy. One of the things Gandhiji said toward the end of his life is that he was working on becoming zero. What he meant by that was, as he explained, was that he was trying to move his life into the direction where ego would fall aside. There would simply be ahimsa coming through, simply be love and compassion, and his ability to connect with other people. So to me, that's such an integrated life philosophy, and it's also been very, very powerful for me to consider these last years as I've studied Gandhiji's life more and more. To consider life philosophy as my own, to bring it into my own self, and to bring it forward into the work that I do. My youngest daughter paid me one of the highest compliments ever. She said, after Mr. Gandhi showed up in our lives, you really changed. And I said, what do you mean? How did I change? And she said, you stopped being so angry. You got much kinder. And I thought about that. And I don't know that I could receive a greater compliment from anybody than to have one of my own children say that to me. So I worked very, very diligently to try to bring Gandhi's philosophy to life in my own life story. And these are the pillars that I have landed on as being the most fundamental to that process. So if we get out of the next slide, sir. So here's one way that I think about Gandhi's formula for change. Now we can apply this formula in our own lives individually, but also in our actions in the world, in our communities, in our universities, in our work sites. I think this encapsulates what Gandhiji was trying to get us to take a look. So the first step, excuse me for that, it's midnight now here, 12 o'clock midnight, and my voice is going a little bit. I hope you can still hear me. So one of the things that Gandhiji did is to take the anger that he felt over the treatment that people were receiving, Indian people were receiving in South Africa and in India, to take that anger and to transform it into these pillars: compassion, courage, and an integrated life philosophy. So the first step that we can take if we're applying Gandhi's formula for change, we can look at what we're angry about in the world. Where do you see, as a social worker, this is very pertinent to me, where do you see injustice happening for people who are oppressed? Where do you see perhaps women not being treated as equal people in the world, people of color, people of here in the United States, the African American people, the Native people, people from southern countries below us, south of us, the Hispanic and Latino people? We can look across our country and we can see oppression happening still all across our country for these other folks. So one thing that we can do is we can look at what we're angry about in the world that we don't like to see. And you just say, what is that thing? What is the thing that you see that makes you angry? And then begin to work toward changing that wherever you can. So perhaps to take stands that women will be more included in moments like this, events like these, or in workplaces, or to speak what's true from their standpoint, for instance, here in our country, to really address the violence that's perpetrated against African American people by regular citizens, but also by the police forces across our country. So to begin in small ways, to start to address through profound compassion, abiding courage, and having an integrated life philosophy, You don't have to wait until all those things are true for you, but to engage your local community in changing where you see these injustices happening. And then while you're doing it, practice loving kindness towards all those people who are involved. That's the biggest challenge, I think, in so many ways, because even though you may be angry with the people who are doing it, Gandhiji challenged us and asked us to take that anger, transform it into compassion, transform it into ahimsa, transform it into nonviolence, and engage with them so that these oppressions would change. It's an incredibly powerful statement. And to see them not as enemies, but as people who just don't understand it. And to go for that kind of change, the kind of understanding through this three-step plan. So this is how I understand Gandhiji's formula, and this is how I tried to apply it in my own life and the work that I've done. Maybe it could be something that you could consider as well. Next slide. So this last piece, being the change that we wish to see in the world. I don't think that it's just a sweet philosophy. I think Gandhiji put forward one of the most difficult and most wonderful challenges ever in human history by saying these simple words. Because if we want change to happen, if we want people who are oppressed, for instance, wherever that you are, whatever country you're in, to be more free, if we want the challenges in our world to change, Gandhi challenged us to take a look at our own hearts and to say, how close are you to being that way that you want that person to be? So when we say, I want this person to change, I want them to be more compassionate, I want them to be kinder towards people who are lower on the social economic scale, I want women to be treated better, I want the voices of women to be heard, whatever the issues are that you feel need to be changed. Gandhiji said, okay, great. Now, what are you doing within your own heart about all those things that you want other people to change? How are you doing about that challenge? And to me, to be the change that we wish to see in the world means that we have to say, I'm not going to wait for someone else to make these changes. I'm not going to sit back and say, well, no, I can see what's wrong here. All this needs to change. No, no, no. What Gandhiji challenged us to do is to say, I am part of the world. If the world is going to change, I have to change also. What a great challenge that is, to be considering the idea that you in your own small way in your life, me in my own small way in my life, I can start to change things and there will be ripple effects throughout our connections, throughout our communities, that if one person, as Thich Nhat Hanh said, can stay calm, if one person can stay centered in the midst of horrendous kinds of difficulties and stay connected and loving, then everything can change. And that's what Gandhiji's challenge is, as far as I'm concerned, when he said, we must be the change we wish to see in the world. That we are the world, centered in our own selves, and that we can be the fomenting factor for massive change. We'll just take it on, just have the courage and the compassion and the love to promote that change, first within ourselves, and then with other people. And to have it be a continuous loop. You don't have to wait until you're perfect at it, of course. Gandhiji always said, I'm not perfect, I'm not a perfect person. No, I'm not. I make mistakes all the time. I can certainly say that for myself. But the potential is there. That's what's so exciting as far as I'm concerned, that the potential for change in the whole world is there within each one of us. And I believe that's what Gandhi put forward to us as this particular challenge. Next slide, please. So, one way to think about it, what does this mean? What would you like to see change in the world? Just think about it for just a moment. What are the changes you'd like to see? And then, what will people need to do differently in order for this change to take place? What will other people have to do in order for the change that you would like to see happen occur? So think about that for just a moment. What will all those other people have to do to change, to make it different? And then next slide. To ask yourself, how close am I to living those qualities that I'd like to see these other people have done? That's Gandhi's great challenge. It's a fundamental shift that we have to make within ourselves. To pull those beautiful, wonderful dreams that we have for how much better the world can be. Pull those into our own hearts and to begin to live those dreams within and bring them out the way that we interact with other people. Even if those other people are different from us, even if those other people are lower in socioeconomic privilege, no matter what the difference is, that we can take a stand about Gandhi's challenge and these qualities that we want to see in the world, and we can make that kind of a difference. Next slide, please. So when we change our own selves, we change our world. And when we put the effort into changing the world, we change ourselves. Gandhi said that if you want to find your way, dedicate yourself to the service of other people, and then you'll find out who you are. And I think that was a beautiful stand to take, and a beautiful philosophy to take on. In the way that we can engage the world, we can help it change things for the better. And as we do that, we will change. We will rise to the occasion when need be. We will find the courage to take a stand, and perhaps to stand against violence that comes directly at us. We'll be able to feel in our own hearts that beautiful principle of ahimsa. It's more than just nonviolence, it's the love within nonviolence that Gandhi challenged us to feel. That's what happens. Change ourselves, change the world. We change the world, we change ourselves. Next slide, please. So who can make these kind of changes? Who can do this? Who can change themselves and who can change the world through doing that? Next slide. This is what Gandhi said. In a gentle way, you can shape the world. And I believe in so many ways this was Gandhi's little secret, that he just kept shaping, gentle shaping, taking a hold of the British Empire and shaping it, taking hold of people's hearts and shaping it. Just little shakes, smiling, engaging, making friends, just little shakes. And eventually, so much change for India, so much change for South Africa, so much rippled out into the world and ended apartheid, ended slavery in so many places around the world, ended the oppression in so many ways here in my country of African American people through the gentle shaking of his disciple Martin Luther King and all the people who worked with him. So that gentle shaking is what we can all do. It doesn't take much. It's actually pretty simple. Just to shake things a little bit and to ask in a circle of people perhaps, how about if we listen to the women in this group? How about if we listen to the people who normally don't have a voice? What if we uplift other people who normally don't have power and bring their voices up to the surface? Next slide. That's the challenge. Can you be gentle? Of course. So let's go change the world for the better. Last slide. Yes, next slide, please. So here's my contact information for anybody who wants to contact me. I'm on Facebook at R McAvinchey, and that's my email address. mcAvinchey@gmail.com. I would love to talk with anybody who wants to continue this conversation after today. It's been such a great honor to be here with you. I hope to be able to stay up long enough to listen to everyone's talk, and I hope I wasn't too long-winded here. So thank you so very, very much.
Such a good, inspiring talk. I learned so many things from you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Don McAvinchey.
In fact, a friend of mine was a good philosopher, David Beverman, might be your contemporary in Michigan State, and he at the same time, 87, 80s, philosopher. And now he teaches in Central University of Budapest. And we had, for the last 15, 20 years, we had constant talk about Gandhi from his own perspective. He has not much of a clue that you have. And the way that transformative power of Gandhi is so important. So important. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Don McAvinchey, and also Dr. Batabayal for joining and assisting the lecture. Actually, we understand that we are connecting from two different time zones from the globe, and it is really late night for you. And we highly appreciate your patience to stay with us till noon. Sir, we can have a quick discussion. If you like, you can take up the discussion right now. Or if you would like to stay till the end of the session, we can do the discussion at the end also. It is your choice.
Why don't you have it right now? Why don't you have it right now so that?
Okay, then we can go ahead with the discussion. So, if any of the participants wish to make any...
The sound is not very clear.
If any of the participants wish to raise any questions and have any discussion with the speaker, you can unmute yourself and raise your question now.
This is Mr. Shivamurthy, you correct your mic because you are conducting, so we need a good sound from your side.
Sure. Is it audible now?
Yeah, it's audible.
Am I clear, sir? Is the voice clear to you?
No, it needs to be.
Perhaps a different microphone.
They can unmute and speak, no?
I hope some of the participants might have some questions. If anyone wants to initiate a discussion or a question and answer session, they can unmute their mic and raise their questions now.
Put it in the chat, Put it in the chat.
You can speak from there.
Hello?
Whose message is this? No questions? Rajendram is touching.
It's kind of coming and going.
Yeah, I like the way that you presented it as a personal story because that sort of embodies what Gandhi was talking about. The change, the envisage or aspire to has to come from within, and I think you were telling your story, which is very nice. So, yeah, that is, it's very enlightening, and probably I know you don't have enough time to tell your story fully, but actually, you can see just the small little snippets that you have, that there is a story behind it, and so, very, very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rajendram. Do you know my friend Dr. Wijayatam in Sri Lanka?
Wijayatam.
Wijayatam, yeah. Runs a large organization, organizes youth for peace.
I'm in the East Coast, little way from that. I think I have heard, I know him, but I have not met him and worked much with him.
And I went to the University of Michigan. I heard you say the other day you went to Ohio State.
That's right.
So we have to be careful with each other.
No, the whole rivals.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Wait.
I can let go of the floor if we want to move on.
Sir, thank you. Thank you for your inspirational presentation. It was very resourceful and provoking us to for our introspection. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation, sir, and for staying with us for so long. You can stay as per your convenience. So,
Thank you, ma'am.
okay, so we are moving forward to the second speaker of the session. We have Professor Rakesh Batabayal. He is one of the most sought after speakers on Gandhi. Professor Batabayal is a historian by training and he chose to work on media studies. His works mainly focus on the history of India towards independence and the following events of partition. He is a pioneer in the branch of institutional history in India. Professor Batabayal's most notable works include Communalism in Bengal from Famine to Noakhali. He is also the author of JNU, The Making of a University, published in 2014. He is also an inspiration to all those who have attended academic staff college of Jawaharlal University for years. He's been a constant inspiration. Today he will be sharing with us his thoughts about Mahatma Gandhi, national movement, and the coming of an aspirational society. It is a privilege to listen to you, sir. Over to you, Professor Batabayal.
Thank you, Professor Shivamurthy, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this momentous occasion for Central University of. Is my voice okay? For this very, very precious occasion for the Central University of Karnataka, where you hosted the 100-meter national flag, and we are really proud of being Indian and feeling the pride, the feeling of pride to the flag is as great as anybody. In fact, what the region where this university is located is used to be called the Bombay Karnataka. And to tell you a very interesting fact that in Nagpur Congress in 1920, when the decision for non-cooperation was taken by Gandhi and entire Congress agreed with him in Nagpur Congress, this region sent 800 people in a train and various trains, 800 people from this part to Nagpur Congress. And that was a momentous moment for this region because this was also to make a cause for Karnataka linguistic provincial Congress, which Gandhi was remodeling. So in that sense, you have done everything very quick. So 800 that time, 100 this time, and I'm glad that I'm part of this time because this is also the region which was called Tilak's region, Tilak's area, no, Bal Gangadhar Tilak. And this is the area where Tilak inspired the Swadeshi movement and then Home Rule movement. And it is just a coincidence that 2 months back I spoke in Bombay University's inaugural lecture on Tilak's. This is also Tilak's, Bal Gangadhar Lokmanya Tilak's centenary death anniversary. And therefore, it is a very interesting combination, a very significant combination that, as a historian of national movement, I am here to speak on Gandhi's 150th, 51st birthday. Now, I have chosen a topic which has this concept called aspirational society. Now, this is very important because what happened what is happening today across the world and across India, more importantly for us in India, has some salience with what is happening over the last 100 years. And in that sense, Gandhi, being Gandhi, having Gandhi, and talking about Gandhi must give us or must be giving us some moments of reflection, moments of introspection of as to what is happening, what has been happening, what has happened. Therefore, I take this moment with all of you present in a new university, in an atmosphere of enthusiasm, adventure, all of you young faculty, young students, researchers. It's a moment of adventure for a new university. It's a moment of reflection for a new university. And therefore, and universities are actually they represent the character of a nation. Oxford represents the character of Britain. Harvard or Michigan represent the character of American intellectual class. Similarly, your university should also reflect or must also be reflecting the character of intellectual life that you must be having. In that sense, I represent the character of my university, which is trying to be this some sense. So in that sense, we are all in the same boat, and the time is changing. Now, in this change time, I must reflect on as to what happened, which must have led me to talk about aspirational society and Gandhi. Now, you see, Gandhi, the first thing is Gandhi's and national movement. What is the connection? And as I said, Karnataka had played huge part, and this part of where you are located had a huge role in Gandhi movement. In fact, one area where big parties like Congress for the last 70 years has been missing was an area which this area has actually given the Philip N.S. Hardikar. In fact, from the 1920s, he started his RS Sabha, where he used to organize young people and organize them for social service. So, therefore, this is an area which produced N.S. Hardikar. And this is an area which also produced Hardikar Manjappa, one of the finest Gandhian that we can ever think of, and who actually dedicated his entire writing life to talk about, and in fact, I have written earlier how he moved from what is called Janajagriti to Janavikas. So, therefore, we have some connection. In fact, we have some connection, and therefore, I'm trying to embark onto that connection to talk about Gandhi, national movement, on an aspirational society. Now, Gandhi comes late 1920s. So what does Gandhi do in national movement, and what is the connection? Now, I thought that uh, Gandhi, as a historian, as we all discuss about this, Gandhi is not the first one of Indian national. Indian national movement has already started. There's a large number of phases. Two phases have already been exhausted, and their potential. They have created a new class of national freedom fighters, social workers, political workers, educated intellectuals. So Gandhi is a product of the national movement. Therefore, quite often we try and isolate Gandhi from the national movement and make him a saint or something. But he's also, remember, he's at the center of it. He's also product of the national movement, and he takes national movement further. That is my point. The second, what he did, he brought new forms of struggle which the freedom fighters or the national movement leadership, the Indian leadership, were already experimenting. So from 1880s, 1870s, in Maharashtra, for example, but there are a large number of intellectuals, editors, for example, T.V. Naik, a very renowned historian, has written about it, how in 1850s and 60s, where the famine became a regular feature in Maharashtra and many parts of, almost all parts of India, and Maharashtra is this part where you are located, has seen dry season, drought, famine, and it is here that the editors, the educated section, were talking about how the colonialism is actually resulting in regular famine and people are dying. And this is the educated section. The editors, for example, they started writing in 1840s, 50s. And it is in this, therefore, Gandhi brings his own understanding. And the first understanding that he brings is he follows the colonial critique of the earlier generation who were critiquing colonialism for various ills that it was committing. And Gandhi actually imbibes that critique and he takes it further. And the central point of that critique was that we must critique colonialism as a system, not as something of the British doing or something as a French doing or something as individual person, Kurdian is doing. No, it, colonialism is a system of oppression, and we must come out of that oppression, of this system. And when he went to Britain, people complained that you will be beaten up by the Lancashire mill owners because you have boycotted, you will get boycott of cloth, and therefore their mills are people are unemployed. He said, look, and this is again the product of the earlier nationalist movement, which had produced this systemic critique, is saying, look, even the poor in Britain or middle class in Britain were also victim of colonialism because colonialism in India must be producing enormous amount of rich people in Britain who were exploiting even their sentiments that we are ruling, as if everyone is ruling. As later on, when communalism and communal history writing were introduced in India with the British, they said Muslim rule, Hindu rule. Now, rulers are different from the people generally. So it is not a beggar, a Muslim beggar was ruling India, or a Hindu beggar will be ruling India. It will be some ruling class which will be ruling, and most of us will be under ruled India. So therefore, these misnomers that the British poor were ruling India were created through what is called the false consciousness by the British ruling class. And Gandhi, therefore, by insisting that colonialism is a systemic oppression, and therefore we have to fight a system, not individual. And that is a central point that he carries forward through his movement, through his writing, through his message. In this, therefore, he presents his struggles, the new forms of struggle against the system, not against individual, not against Viceroy. And that is the novel thing that, in fact, Don this morning was so nicely talking about the transformative role of himself. Gandhi was meeting viceroys. Gandhi was writing letters. Nobody had ever thought about that he's compromising Indian cause. Nobody had ever said that Gandhi is betraying the cause, except in one or two occasions. Gandhi was attacked even then, even now. But Gandhi was open. He was meeting because he said, look, it's a systemic fight. We are fighting a system. Individuals are all part of that system, and therefore, the best thing that comes to our mind when he was talking about system, when in Bardoli, when he was arrested and taken to jail, because this was the lowest moment after he suspended the Chauri Chaura movement, and because it was going violent, and people criticized him, Nehru criticized him, Subhas criticized him, that is in the monument in Punjab, he said, no, means are as important as the end. And we don't have, I don't want to have, if you want to carry on, go on. But I don't want to have a movement, I don't want to have a freedom of Indians on the basis of violence. Because after that, you are lost. Because, and this history proves any society which has gained its freedom or any means, any other thing through violent means, actually end up being violent society. You can see Pakistan, you can see Bangladesh, you can see many parts where the means has not been pure and therefore end is anybody's guess. And that he insisted. So when he was arrested, he was taken to court, and many of the younger generation may not be knowing this trial is one of the beautiful trials in which he says, he tells the judge that I plead guilty. I am guilty. Please give me highest punishment that your law tells you. So he was under the legal jurisdiction and legal procedure. He was following the procedure that I'm pleading guilty. Give me the. And what did the judge say? Judge said that okay, I have to give you punishment and harshest punishment, as you say. But if you are acquitted, or if you're given your punishment is lessened by the higher authorities, I'll be the first person to be happy. See the judiciary today and see what was happening. What was Gandhi's argument? Gandhi said, I'm pleading guilty because I have broken a law. But I am also answerable to a superior force, whether this law is right or wrong. In my own country, we talked about this in Champaran. If in my own country I cannot visit other place, there are restrictions on my visit, my speech, and everything in my own country, the law is wrong because I have some superior force. So I have to respond to that. So today, for example, everywhere you can pass a law and make me criminal, but then I will say, am I fighting for people? Am I fighting for the poor? Am I fighting for? Am I talking for poor? Am I right? So right and wrong can most often supersede any laws. For example, farmers' education is happening. So we have to see whether it is right or wrong. It may be legal or illegal, but it could be right and wrong. And this is what Gandhi was talking about the system. And this he learns from national movements, take it forward, adds his own concern, his own understanding of idea of morality in the purity of means to which we apply to gain something. Now, third thing that he does in bringing a new form of struggle, and that is what we were already experimenting with struggle in Swadeshi movement. Before that, what Gandhi brings as a new element that he said, look, non-violence is a natural tool in our society. You see, Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, you got a lot of every society. You got a lot of this archaeological, since you have a big archaeological department coming up, and you have enormous amount of artifacts which are excavated. But what we have not excavated is so much in detail, or we don't have the remains of warring factions or war machines or weapons of destruction. So in some sense, it shows that he was in a way intuitively right that we are a society which are natural in terms of non-violence, and therefore our struggle has to fit into our own people, our own temperament, and that's why this society has produced Gautam Buddha, Mahavir. Anyway, you are in the Veershaiva region. The entire social transformation has to have a peaceful component. It has to go by adopting a peaceful way. And that is what the people agreed to. And therefore, our forms of struggle, different forms or one form, has to adapt to people's own need, and therefore non-violent, peaceful means of struggle against the system has to be our form, which is a natural template. Now, he added something much more serious, which Sean was, and everyone has accepted across the world. He said, look, non-violence is not of the weak. We are not asking to follow non-violence struggle because we are weak. We may be weak because we don't have weapons like the British Empire has, but we are not weak because our demand is just demand. Our demand is truthful demand. Therefore, a just demand does not need violence to carry it forward. We have the justice, the morality on our side. Therefore, the oppressive system, which is immoral, violent, because the immoral system has to establish itself through violence. Violence could be worldly violence, it could be worldly violence. It can have the weapons of destruction, it can have the words of destruction. So they need violence, we don't need violence. And this is the form that he ingrains in the national movement. And all three major movements, remember, he prepared people for those movements. So 1919, 1920, 1930, 31, and 1942. So 10 years of preparation. In between, he was doing creative work, constructive work, and I'll come back to that. So therefore, the process through which he prepared his people, he prepared Indians, is what is more of my concern today. That through this movement of national regeneration, he created and he extended the idea of the earlier period of national movement. That who are we? What are Indian people? So the idea of Indian people has been extended by Gandhi through, that's why I said 800 people from Gadag and other places, where in Karnataka, the northern Karnataka, they went to Nagpur, participated and said, we are Karnataka people and we speak Kannada, and therefore we need a different, not the Bombay Provincial Congress Committee or neither Madras Provincial Congress Committee. We want Karnataka Provincial Congress. We are part of the national movement because we also are Indians, we also are Kannada speaker. So now this notion of Indian people is what Gandhi's contribution here fundamental. Now, how did it happen? First, this is a period 1919, 1920, 1915 when he comes. 1916 is a home rule time. People are coming educated section in cities like Belgaum, Harvard, Hubli, in your area, in Mysore. People are coming together primarily the university level. And this is also the Tilak's area and other area like Allahabad, Banaras, Lahore. These were where Annie Besant was active. So gradually people were coming. Now by 1920, Gandhi realized that the British rule of policy of divide and rule had actually been effective in the sense there are sections which British had created which was talking about Hindu-Muslim fight. As this is a Muslim country, Muslim nation, somebody was talking about Hindus' interests were subjugated, which the discussions even today goes on. Gandhi thought of Indian people. They said Hindu-Muslim unity is one of my first article of faith. So he, from 1919, if you see, till he died, his entire mission was also consumed by the fact that he was wanted to have Hindu-Muslim unity. He was looking for ways to bring this. The first thing he did was that he thought that in Khilafat, where the Khalifa of Turkey was being ill-treated after the war by the Allied powers, he thought, and rightly so, that Muslim feelings were not, Muslims were not feeling okay with it. So he tried to be siding with them, saying that this was a breach of trust by the British Empire, and this has happened in the Middle East also, where the British promised something in secret to Israel, the future Israel, and betrayed the forces that supported the British and French armies. That is the forces from Syria, from in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had not come at that point of time. The Arabia and other peninsula, who supported the British and French, but after the war, the colonial powers betrayed them. So Gandhi was familiar with all these. He said, look, this was a breach of trust, and therefore we have to be understood and brought people together with the Khilafat movement. It is another fact that something happened in Turkey itself, the Khilafat collapsed, and therefore the reason for that was no longer there. And here, after Khilafat and non-cooperation movement collapsed, there were riots of different kinds in different regions. 1924 to 26, there were riots all around the country, Hindu-Muslim riots, and Gandhi was killed. So his mission to make an Indian people to Hindu-Muslim unity was one of fundamental, and even today, Gandhi is there for us as a symbol of that unity. And wherever we feel we are disunited, we go back to Gandhi to bring us again in a united platform. The second, and in fact, many people in many areas, for example, in Bihar and Eastern India, the Ansaris, for the Momin, they call themselves Momin. Momins were solidly with Gandhi, even in 47, 48, when the entire 40s, when there was a Pakistan movement across the country and people wanted to be in power and create a Pakistan. Momins were against Muslim League and with Gandhi. There are hundreds and thousands of people, even then when they supported Pakistan, they were with Gandhi. They were not against, in that sense, Congress or Gandhi, but they were propaganda to show Gandhi as anti-Muslim, but that propaganda did not reach people in the same manner. It not accepted. Therefore, in fact, the ulema, Jamaat ulema, a Hind was created in the 30s. It was steadfast with Gandhi against Muslim League. So you had people who thought that Gandhi's message of Indian people is right, and they were all part of it. The second, uh, even today, people ask about whether Dalit were part of nation, because in the conceptualization of Indian nation, Dalit, even what happened in Hathras when we are celebrating with a 100-meter flag, and I'm proud of it. I also thought about the girl who was burned by the police rather than the family after a torturous rape. Am I not shamed? Was she not part of me? Was she not part of India? If I am part of India, was she not part of India? Therefore, the question is absolutely legitimate. And in 1920s and 30s, the British tried to use it. And when Ambedkar said Dalits and the depressed classes were not treated by the upper class well, and therefore we want separate electorate, separate political, he was in a way justified. And Gandhi, what did Gandhi say? Gandhi fought through his life that we are all Indian, and therefore, if a section does not feel to be Indian, I will sacrifice my life in order to make them feel that they are Indian. And therefore, while he worked, and the word people object later on, but at that point of time, he fought against untouchability, gave them a word, gave the community a word, Harijan, God's children, which today we find slightly abominable, but at that point of time, this was one of the revolutionary movements. Nowhere in the world, people who are doing politics has left politics and devoted themselves for social work for 2 years. And there is third point, I'll come back. In 1924-25 and 1934-35, he spent the entire year canvassing, championing, advocating, campaigning against untouchability. And whom did he go to? He went to the Sanatanis, the upper caste, the Orthodox section, and pleaded with them that untouchability is not part of our system. Let's clear it. Let's remove it. He did because he knew that depressed classes were too weak to mobilize on this issue. So he was trying to put the onus of mobilization and removing it to the upper caste. This is a different story. We'll come back to it. Now, through this, therefore, he was making sure that a society comes up which is Indian. So an Indian society will have all this common. And the third thing that I was talking about is the fact that he was doing all these uh, was also testimony to the fact that an idea of India is an idea of the people. An idea of people has to be brought in terms of not asserting that we are Indian, but through the means, through the modes, and through the medium of creating an atmosphere that everyone feels that they're Indian. This is what Gandhi was trying to do, because for him, means were very important. And in those means, in those means, he was also bringing certain very important elements to Indian national movement. And through that national movement, because national movement was also creating structures of institutions, civility, moral codes, how we live, how do we share with each other our national resources. And therefore, the first thing you notice when you read national movement, and I was reading very important attributes of this region where we are located, in northern Karnataka. Fantastic people like Umabai Kundapur, Krishna Panjikar, Ballari Siddha, new Rich has been writing on this, new lifestyle managers and media
Check on
managers
YouTube.
have been writing on this. And then aspirational society is this. But if you read critically, an aspirational society is a product. That we want to aspire to a home like this, we want to aspire to a health facility like this. So, as what we aspire is a product. Now, what was the process through which we can have those is somehow getting diluted, sometime getting lost. And it is where we must have to come back to Gandhi and the freedom movement and the kind of society they regional development, which will have equity, which will have a distribution, which will be distributed. They use the word in 1955, socialistic pattern of society. Forget about the term, but the sense, the spirit in which Gandhi worked, and along with him, everyone came was, and Gandhi actually led a movement of the mind, where in 1928, in the Motilal Nehru Committee report in Delhi, or in Lahore, Pune Swaraj Declaration, next year in Karachi, where the famous fundamental rights resolution was passed in the Congress session, where all the blueprint of today's constitution, blueprint of a society which will be harmonious, which will be compassionate, which will be talking about the last man in the road, Antyodaya, Sarvodaya, Antyodaya. All these terms are later coined, but the spirit was there. And these are the spirits in which, to which, and on the basis of which, we had created an economic policy, for example, regional development. The backward region will be developed because we don't want any region to be left behind. Today, when we are talking about competitive federalism in the 2000 onwards, started talking about, the states began fighting. So Karnataka was a great loser compared to Andhra Pradesh, where Chandrababu Naidu and S. M. Krishnamurthy fighting for resources from the center, investment for the center. So states were made to fight with each other. Similarly, now the cities are fighting. They don't fight for projects only. They fight in cricket. So the cities are fighting against each other. And we have to be, the media makes us crazy to be fighting for either Bangalore or for Hyderabad or for Calcutta or for Mumbai or for Jaipur against Kochi. So what we are actually reducing ourselves to is against the spirit in which the entire program, entire idea of what we are, Indian people are, with Gandhi, in fact, was the central figure to inspire us. In this sense, therefore, a political and an economy was developed. Through democracy, it was thought that democracy will be a process through which equality will come, through which affirmative action will be implemented, and economy will get resources to everyone so that the gains of economy will be distributed to people through their means, through affirmative action, through the last man in the line we brought into the now, this was a process. The economy was a process. The democracy was a process. Now, what is happening today? What is happening today in the name of aspirational society is that the idea of solidarity is being attacked. That Indian people are solidarity. Solidarity means it could mean anything, but in Gandhian terms, in the way Gandhi, or not just Gandhi, but Nelson Mandela, you could get anyone. Solidarity means when I feel part of a human species. So anybody in Palestine is hurt, I feel that I have lost a corner in my heart. If a child in Syria is drowned, the refugee is killed in Myanmar, or a Hindu minority is attacked in Bangladesh, or Afghanistan people are suffering, we feel pain because they are all our human brethren. We are nation, we are caste, we are community, all our attachments are there, but there are larger attachments. Suddenly something was happening that we are pulled out of our larger attachment and we are told that we have become rich. So we are our only cousins are the rich cousins in America, not the poor cousins. You will be surprised that very few rich relatives nowadays visit their poor relative. So this is a syndrome from the lowest rung of the society to the upper rung of the society, that we get isolated from our solidarities, our understanding of solidarity to a lot. And therefore, this notion of isolated, you have gated communities. People are in Bangalore and Delhi, they are proud that they live in gated community where no beggar can enter, no feriwala can enter. So we are preventing poor from even interacting with us. And that is the society we try to create in the name of aspirational society. If we aspire for a gated society, a penthouse, what we are doing is in that house, no voice from anyone will come to us. I can't hear a feriwala selling something at a cheap price. I can't hear a beggar asking for money. A fakir is not allowed.
So therefore, no one else to come and ask for chanda. The children for Saraswati Puja cannot come and ask for 1 rupee chanda because they are prevented at the gate. So what therefore I'm indicating is, in the name of aspirational society, we actually have isolated products to show that this is what we aspire. The processes are marginalized. Processes are in fact not even shown. And therefore, while the youth today aspire to have a lifestyle of theirs, the process through which he would reach there or she would reach there, for example, a good education, in a good school which is affordable to the poor, a society which not only respect is a different word, where a woman, a girl child will feel safe to travel to the school and come back. 80% of the girl child drops out of the school after class 8 because the higher secondary schools are far off, where they could not commute every day in the transport system, which is rickety and very difficult because you have all kinds of things happening on the road. So a large number of children drops out of their class standard 8. When they reach plus 10, they pass 10, plus 2 schools were also not there. So all these processes through which we can aspire a product of aspirational society is somehow being marginalized. And this is where we have to remember, bring Gandhi back in order to make the society more harmonious. We have to have a notion of solidarity where we feel part of a larger people. If somebody is violated, somebody is victimized, somebody is anything, somebody is, if you are traveling to Turkey and in a black market migration visa and you are drowned in the sea, a lot of Punjabi youth used to get drowned in the Greek Sea because they were all trying to smuggle themselves on an illegal visa to Europe and other. One should feel sympathetic. That's what Don was talking about compassion. Compassion is what makes us human. So this solidarity was an idea through which our compassion was reflected. You are in the land of great Vachana writers, Vachanas. And if you see, the two things that come through those Vachanas are the ethics of work and ethics of compassion. And this is the message that this land gives. And Gandhi brought these messages and wove them into politics. So politics, he said, everyone said politics is dirty. He said, no, politics is moral. So let's moralizing politics. Moralizing means creates. That's why he was never saying that politics and religion should be separated. He said politics should be having the highest method, highest items of religion with capital R. Religion means ethics, morality, compassion. These are our religion, and politics should be having those things. We should not hurt each other. That is religion. We don't hurt each other. So therefore, in today's notion of aspirational society, which is not being researched as such, except the business managers and you have a business department, but we must bring Gandhi back to idea of solidarity, back to the processes of how we aspire, processes to how we acquire the aspired thing. In a very important, I'll end with this example, and a very interesting, important article in Guardian recently, a couple of years back. A journalist writes that he sees a gold-plated Ferrari in front of a shop. He knows that the owner does not drive the Ferrari for 200 miles an hour, but it is there to just show that he has this Ferrari. A lot of super rich today want to show you that he has this or she has this. On the other hand, the journalist meets a lady who was begging in London street and begging, and then she shows her breast that I am actually lacerating and I have to feed this child of mine. For that, I need money to feed myself. Now, this is a contrast, and our country is full of such contrasts where billionaires are increasing and poverty is increasing. In these contrasts, and poverty in a manner is an absolute poverty. You don't see this kind of poverty very rarely, even in African countries. Absolute poverty. So, in this contrast, therefore, we need compassion to dominate our discussion. We need solidarities to dominate our discussion. the politics of who Indians are to have these components to just define who we are rather than any narrow political idea of defining who we are. It's not about asserting that I'm Indian. It is about introspecting how are we Indians? Are we not paying the dies in Kerala? How have paying the flood? Are we not paying if somebody dies in UP? Are we not paying? If we feel the pain, the similar manner if somebody dies next to my house, then we are Indian. And in that sense, it will be the massive tribute to Gandhi. If we from today start feeling a bit of pain for anyone dies in the humanity, anyone is underpaid, anyone is hungry in the world, and if we feel that way, we are Gandhian in that sense. Thank you so much for your patience to first inviting me, listening to me, and the fact that I was witness to a very momentous occasion in your university of unfurling our national flag. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Next,
Thank you, thank you for this honor to be able to speak to such a uh, honorable audience, and this also for me, what I see, for instance, in nonviolent communication. I actually will be speaking about nonviolent communication that continues the living of the Gandhian principles. I know all of us would like to have lived and had some contact, at least to have lived in the time that Gandhi lived and to have felt his presence in some way in our lives. But that unfortunately is very limited, as the history is always squared and it's not available for everyone to be present. But I, I too really was inspired by Gandhian principle of nonviolence. And this wonderful idea of living an unconditional love, that is ahimsa, and to be able to see this vibrate in our lives, in my own life. And for me, this opportunity never was there, but I found it in meeting Marshall Rosenberg, who in his own way was continuing this living principle of nonviolence in his life, in his words, and in his actions. And I was inspired. I was very much, things changed for me during the time of the war in Sri Lanka. We were going through a very painful and very cruel war. And I was living in the middle of it, in the east coast of Sri Lanka. And these dying and death became very, very common for us. And the cruel way the war was going was very unbearable and very tragic. And I know we have not written enough. And I think there were some movies and all made, but still there's a lot more to say. In fact, when I was conducting these workshops on nonviolent communication, we had the children and adults who have gone through this painful war in their own lives. When they were asked to talk about it, the moment they remembered, they fainted again and again. And that shows the trauma that they were carrying through. So I was also living in this time of war in Sri Lanka. And in fact, at one point, the person with whom I was working, another priest, one Father Chandra Fernando, when he was killed point blank, actually the murderers walked into his house, into the rectory, killed him point blank, and just in close proximity. And I heard the sound and I walked and I went running and to the place and opened the door, and there he was in a pool of blood. That really frightened me. And that is violence, so very. I know we are talking about non-violence, but actually, when we know a little bit of what violence is, when we have encountered violence, then we see what non-violence is and what this non-violence, ahimsa, is calling us for. And at that time, I thought this was time for me to leave the place. I was allowed to continue my studies, and I left Sri Lanka, went to America, and there I met. While I was studying communication studies, and I was not sure I wanted to come back because it was the war was still going on, and I just didn't know what to take back to this place and how to live a different life. And at that time, fortunately, there was a friend of mine who was working with Marshall Rosenberg as his secretary. She asked me if I would like to meet Marshall Rosenberg, who actually was living this principle, Gandhian principle, in his own way, in his own life. So I went to meet him, and that really changed my life because he was offering something that I could really take back to a war-torn country. And so I asked Marshall if he would be willing to come to Sri Lanka and to teach about nonviolence, this nonviolent communication, which is so much the same ahimsa, that is the unconditional love, and how to live it in a very concrete and very practical ways. And that was the beautiful part of Marshall, that he was always ready to move wherever he was called. And in fact, even into most difficult places where there is war going on. And the day that he was supposed to come to Sri Lanka, I was waiting to receive him at the airport. And that's the day that there was this bomb, that the most famous Buddhist temple was bombed by the Tigers, the rebels. And everything came to a stop. So I had to call off his travel and everything. And then I was stranded in Colombo, so I could not get back to my own place. But when he came, he told us about this beautiful, precious gift of this nonviolent communication, a process of communication. Actually, I would love to talk about Gandhi, but I know all of you know about Gandhi and you know his principles. And what I'm actually interested in, how could we continue living this principle? And I think the speaker before put it so very nicely, that the society that we are is different. We are just thinking about and not living the principles. And therefore it is time for us to think how we could live this principle of nonviolence in our present day and our present situation in life. And therefore I will like to talk a little bit about nonviolent communication. How does it represent the principle of nonviolence or ahimsa of Mahatma Gandhi? And so when I brought Marshall at the time of the war, and he explained and proposed to the people this way of living of nonviolent communication, people were really enthused because they were found a way to really live an unconditional love in a moment of war and moment of strife and struggle. And so people who were affected by it found a way to console themselves, and people who were serving them and helping them found a way to reach them and connect with them. And therefore this wonderful nonviolent communication for me is the continuation of Gandhian principle of nonviolence in today's world. And so what did Marshall do to bring this up to date to our present day? And especially, he brought nonviolence into communication. And you know, in communication, there are many models of communication. But most of them are what they call the transmission model of communication. That is, what we are talking about, transmission means transmitting or transferring or transporting a message. And that still is the model that we follow. But this actually is not a very good model of communication, because we are, and this is what is critiqued by Paulo Freire, one of the most distinguished scholar who critiqued educational systems. He says he calls it the banking system of education, where we are thinking of sending, transferring, or transmitting knowledge to our students. And I think, unfortunately, all our education system, most of them, and also the other organizations that we live in the present day society, are following the same model of transmission model. But actually, for any student of communication will remember there is an older model that has not been really looked into. And that could be so enriching for us to look into. Where it is not, the purpose is not to transmit or transfer or transport knowledge and information. It is about the words are characteristic of this model, which we call the cultural model or the ritual model, is a model where communication brings community, it brings us to communion, and that is what real communication should be. And that should be applied in our educational system, and that is what Paulo Freire did. He said the way that we do education is still the banking system of education. Instead, we use a different model of communication. That is the cultural model, which is to say that we educate people not through a banking system, but through a dialogue. Because knowledge and learning is not something that we share and transfer and transmit to other people. Knowledge and learning is a product, is a happening. When people really connect and commune and communicate, and the result is learning, and which is a completely different way of organizing our education systems. And I think we have, since his critique of education, there has been a movement to move away from this transmission model to a cultural model, but we haven't gone very far. So he focused this ahimsa or nonviolence or unconditional love in the process of communication. So he talked about communication. How do we communicate? And first thing he said, what is really blocking our communication? That is on the way of our communicating is actually our own judgments. It is not other people, it's just our own judgments. We are so full of judgments and every moment, and we are so used to judging one another and ourselves, and that we find it so difficult to really open up ourselves to this unconditional love that is the base of nonviolent communication. So he says there are 4 steps for this model, very simple model, where he says the first one is observation instead of judgments. So to be able to reflect upon and remember where we are, is our words, our conversations, our communication, is it full of judgments? Judgments always closes our way. And it is only, we need to get back, open ourselves through observation, to stay with only observation. I think it's Krishnamurti who said that the highest form of intelligence is non-judgmental presence. And I think that is what nonviolent communication, the first step is to insist on observation, to get back from our judgmental ways, and to be able to change or try our judgments into observation, to stay with observations, so that we may be open to one another. And the next step, he said, is observation. Next is feelings. We have left out the feeling, which is actually the paste of humanity that unites us, that connects us, is all our feelings. And if we leave out our feelings in our communication, there cannot be a community, there is no communion, there is no way to build peace in our society. So that is the second step of, he says, to be able to, first of all, to let go of our judgments and to turn them into observations. And the second step of admitting and being in touch with our own feelings, and to be able to be in touch with the feelings of other person. And this keeps us humane, keeps us very much connected. So this is important for communication. And the third, he says, is behind our feelings, there is always a need. He says, like anyone does in this world, is always to fulfill a need. And to be in touch with the need, not only our needs, but also with the needs of the other people. And these are the things that really connects. These are the things that can truly build a community. And finally, he says, to be able to request for what we need instead of demanding. And these four simple steps of communication builds up a way to communicate. And this could be translated in so many different ways into our education systems and into our societal movements, children's education. It is so very important that we learn how to listen, to be able to be in touch with our own feelings and the feelings of the others, and how to listen to one another without judgment. Simple principles which gave me a way to live this ahimsa that Gandhi was talking about. This unconditional love, to be present to humanity, to be present to one another, which we have somehow through our own education, through our own systems that we are used to, through this transmutation, the model of communication that we follow in our society, in our organizations, in our universities, and all the education systems, that we have somehow lost this way of really connection. So they say, for instance, nonviolent communication, the purpose of nonviolent communication is to be able to connect with another person. It's not to really to hear, to understand, but to connect. That is, actually, I would not even stop that connection. The communication should bring us to communion. That is, we become one with one another. And that is the whole purpose of communication in its true sense of the word. And in that way, he gave us a way to live this process of nonviolence, ahimsa, that is so important to us. So when I came back after my studies, which I took long because basically I was afraid to come back, and also I didn't know what to bring back. When I met Marshall, who was living this Gandhian principle in his own life, and who has found a way of expressing it and giving it. And I brought him, when I was able to bring him, I was happy that I was able to bring back something that is needed for this place of war, of violence. And when I came, of course, I was got an appointment as a lecturer at the university. And of course, from one to the other, I moved on. Brought me as a lecturer, then I became the head of the department, the dean, and then I became the rector of the campus. And everything went so very smoothly. But then I saw what I wanted to do was not to forget what's going on in the country. I wanted to be present to the suffering, the struggle, the pain that was present in the country. So when I started teaching, I also started a home for children. I collected about 20 children were with me who had lost their parents in this cruel war. And I made a home for them. And I did not teach them this process of communication, but instead, like with children, what you do is you teach them by modeling it. So I started living this model of communication, which is nonviolent communication. And I found it so very beautiful because they grasp it so very easily. As you know, they are more open to all of this. It is the adults that we have so used to our judgments and so fond of our judgments and so attached to our judgments and our opinions that it's so difficult for us to move anywhere. To be able to be free and to move, to be in the present, to be present to others, to the others' pain, it becomes very difficult. So when I have to really practice it, actually live it, it is then I really learned this process of nonviolent communication, which has transformed me immensely because it brought me so much of peace and so much of freedom and so much of understanding because the knowledge, learning, everything came from there. Actually, it's nothing, it's not from the books, it's from the living experience with these children. That is where I learned this process. And so it is a very important change, I think, because I think in our educational system and in our present day society, it is so very important. And so when I brought this process into Sri Lanka, and it was such a beautiful gift for this warring and struggling, and it spread very easily. A lot of people were interested in it. A lot of people learned and started living this process of nonviolent communication. And and soon after, then I went on to take it to India. And now, of course, India has a very growing community of nonviolent practitioners, nonviolent communication trainers, teachers. So it's a beautiful process that I know I don't want to. I'm not here to teach and talk about that, but I just trying to let you know that there is ways of living and continuing the Gandhian principles in our life. It is not about discussing or knowing or teaching each other about Gandhian principles. It is about how it lives in our lives, in our process, in our work, in whatever we do. Is this process alive? I think Professor Rakesh said that so beautifully. He said he went to really what Gandhi wanted, that has always been almost forgotten in today's India. And the unity of religion, unity of caste, all these things, he wanted to unite, to bring them together. And therefore it is good for us when we are talking about Gandhi, remembering Gandhi and his work, that we also remember to continue and find some ways of continuing this process of living this ahimsa in our lives, in the lives of our communities and the lives of our countries. That it be really, and it is not such a difficult task. It is such a, for those who have come to learn the process and have started practicing it, now they begin to realize how easy it is and how easily it could make so much change in their life, in their communities, in their families, and how to really find a way to really be present to one another. And I think this is basically what I want to talk about, that we take initiatives to change the model of communication that is controlling us and has become, that we change from this model of transmission model to a cultural model, where communication means to commune, to become one with the other, to build community, not to just to send messages and receive messages, and in the process start dividing people into castes, into religions, into language, and all these divisions. We need to find a way of really communicating and communing and building communities in our lives. So this is what I would like to propose, and and as a continuation of living the principle, the Gandhian principle of nonviolence, of unconditional love, and to be able to be present to humanity in ourselves and in each person in our community. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share.
Please stay with us. Sebastian Joseph.
Thank you very much, Ramya. Can you hear me, Ramya?
Yes.
My lecture title, as Ramya said, makings of Gandhi's strategies and ideologies. So it will be a non-violent act if I go with a prolonged lecture now at this time when the Delhi is facing a very violent situation for all of you. But I will complete my lecture, say for example, within maximum 30 minutes, and kindly bear with me. Gandhi and memories on Gandhi always inspire the rational mind of any period of phase. Because Gandhi was different and distinctively different man of ideas and strategies. There is a general tendency in looking at Gandhi. It's a general tendency, not with scholars, looking at Gandhi more as a moral philosopher than as an astute politician. Maybe because of the ideological rigorous position taking that Gandhi followed in his lifetime. It can also be because of the commonsensical understanding of politics as a game of strategies alone, which was markedly invisible in the politics of Gandhi. So I must say that Gandhi's politics was, politics infused with morality and moral considerations. It was a principled moral position, but not devoid of strategies. Gandhi's deep understanding of modernity and pre-modern times prompted him to think in a different manner, living the cultural mindset of his own times. This is the most important aspect I see in Gandhi as a history teacher and a history researcher of his modern history. How one can survive, overcome the mindset of a period is very difficult. Imagine the mindset of times when Indians were living in the colonial times, as subjected to the system rationality of the empire. It was very difficult to overcome the system rationality of the empire with the poor Indians' life world rationality. How many of the people were knowing the exploitation of the colonial regime? A regime which unleashed in India, a sort of economic exploitation rule and cultural conquest of India for about 200 years. If you take the starting point of this exploitation and cultural subordination from the Battle of Plassey onwards 1757 to 1947, say for about 2 centuries. And my question is this: whether the people are conscious about their plight in British India? Yes, they were conscious, they were knowing it. And if not consciousness, was it because of the lack of understanding for getting themselves emancipated from the framework, the mental framework into which they are compressed, something like subjected to a 100 mentality of the 100. Many Indians were like that. That is why many of them positively responded to the British rule. So it was a collective consciousness of the times that this consciousness was overcame when Gandhi entered the political field of British India. I would like to look at Gandhi as a man and as a leader who overcame this common subjected 100 feeling through a thorough understanding, not understanding, a critical understanding of knowledges of India in those far-off times. When people thought, or the thought world of the common masses were mediated through the superior notions of Western thought and ideology. So Gandhi rightly sensed it. How he sensed it means, this was the standpoint, epistemology of M.K. Gandhi. He was learning India in that sense, So the first point I would like to suggest to place before you, the august audience, is an epistemology which I call as a traveling epistemology. But let me say before that, now say something about a learning exercise that Gandhi underwent as soon as he reached this country in 1915, January. He was a celebrity then because people were knowing him. We know about the welcome that was offered to him upon his arrival, return to India. Gandhi as a celebrity and ordered things to people and other leaders. He could have ordered other people to do this and that and things like that. But he proved himself by making him understand that it is better to know India first. Because India in those times is not the India as we see today. Both the spatial and temporal plane are entirely different. You cannot think about a Kerala sitting in Delhi in those days like you think now. The geographical distance, even though it was the same, the distance because of the lack of technology and transport or communications it was too late. Kerala can be considered a very far off place in those times. So that is why Gandhi chose a different strategy. A strategy of knowing cultural, economic, social and regional making, or rather I would like to call it as the makings of India. Not a single making, but the makings of India. That is why Gandhi definitely appropriated the diverse life forms of India in its unique ecological specificities. Gandhi, in that sense, can be considered as an ecological man also. Here, one should know a little about the British engagements in the 18th and first half of the 19th century. Efforts taken by many Britons and other Europeans who followed a strategy of traveling for understanding India in a general term, but especially in order to understand and know about the particular resources in India. Historians like David Arnold call it as a phase, very interestingly, they have labeled it as the phase of the itinerant science, science which is traveling all over India for understanding India. So traveling is an essential prerequisite for knowing any region. If you do not travel, you will not be able to understand the real part of the region, the real nature of the region, or any region in the globe. And that is why the British followed that epistemological engagement for documenting the diversities of India. And these diversities were later, codified as regulations, gazetteers, secret reports, reports on specific resources, etc., like that. And all the knowledge that accrued went a long way in colonizing India. So this is a kind of knowing India for subjugating India or subordinating India to the networks of colonialism and capitalism. Now over to Gandhi, he too followed this traveling epistemology for knowing India. And I wish to refer to the advice he got from his political mentor, as all of you know, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, towards this end. Gandhi traveled far and wide, using all types of transportation methods, but the intent of Gandhi was just opposite to the ideology and strategy of the colonizer. And he evolved what he called something like a counter ideology to confront the colonial knowledge base and bastions of power, well structured through certain discursive strategies. So Gandhi understood that without understanding India, he cannot fight in the British. The colonial gaze, if you put in the phrase of terminology of Foucault, gaze, and the intent embedded thereof became visible for Gandhi. So this visibility was, made possible by Gandhi to foreground a critical scientific Indian approach to the problem of colonialism. So ideology of Gandhi resulted from this field experience, coupled with his already well-established knowledge about forms, agencies, ideologies, and strategies of a white government in South Africa. And also articulated through political philosophies, Western as well as Eastern. So travels and interaction with the Indian scenario gave him an opportunity to understand the idea of India and its attendant liabilities and potential traits. If Indian demography was weak in certain areas, it had its potentials too. The same human resource base which British Empire utilized for its onward march of imperialism, the same collective can be mobilized for an emancipatory struggle, which we call as the national movement, and Gandhi sensed it. The idea of India, gathered through luminous travels, really made Gandhi to conceptualize his ideologies and formulate his strategies, but at the same time, strategies also. So the base of Gandhi was well laid then, established, structured, and he continued this travel all through his lifetime. For example, he visited Kerala, my part of region, 5 times for getting involved in various struggles. For example, in 1921, he came to Kerala as to support the operations, Khilafat operations in Malabar. In 1925, when the focus of his visit was Vaikam Satyagraha for opening roads, approach roads to a temple for all castes. In 1927, for protesting against untouchability. In 1934, for raising funds for the downtrodden. When a little girl, Kaumudi, donated her entire ornaments to him in a very emotively charged atmosphere. And in 1937, for celebrating the temple and the proclamation. So Gandhi found a fertile and mature political scenario in Kerala, with a lot of intellectuals and ordinary folk yearning for a free and fair society. So this is sensing India now. So somebody should sense Kerala for understanding what is India. So a large number of people from Kerala also got associated with Gandhi, even for a brief moment. They were greatly influenced by the charm of his philosophy and also by the charm of his political activism. It is significant to note that, I don't know whether you know it or not, a Christian youth named Titus Taylor Kundeli accompanied Gandhi during the historic Dandi March in 1930. And it was a cinematic coincidence that when Titus followed the footsteps of Gandhi in Dandi, another freedom fighter from Kerala, popularly called Kerala Gandhi, Kerala, he led a Kerala Dandi march from Calicut to Kayyannur in Malabar, following the decision of the Kerala Pradesh Congress Committee to break the salt laws. So you can see that this reflexivity is there, discharging from the personality of Gandhi, the real making of a leader to understanding the makings of India. Be it Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, things are the same. And during his visit to Kerala, I too have a very personal thing to share with you. During his visit to Kerala, related to Vaikam Satyagraha, Gandhi was invited by my college in those times, that is in 1925 on March 18. Gandhi came to my college, Union Christian College, perhaps responding to the spirit of a politically conscious and at the same time an ecologically rich campus, often referred to as the Shantiniketan of Kerala. He planted a mango tree, which has become a very monumental part of a monumental memory these days, and wrote in the visitor's diary, delighted with the ideal situation. So whenever we see this mango tree, we forget the mango tree and we think about Gandhi. That is a personality trait of Gandhi. So Gandhi, understood through these visits, through these engagements, the same modus operandi that was followed by a collective system, that is the British Empire network. So Gandhi's system, and in those times, you can consider it as a single man system in that sense, for producing a counter intellectual standpoint that would definitely reveal the hidden agenda of the colonialist idea of progress. Here one should not get confused with Gandhi's ideas on modernity, because Gandhi was a critic of modernity, for he sensed some problems with the notions of liberty, which may lead to a completely profit-making enterprise of capitalism. That is the relation there, like Agil Bilgrami and the scholars like that argue. But this what made Gandhi understand the real conditions of India, something like following a dictum with the great Navrojian Roman about the un-British rule in India. He sensed that this is not British rule. Similarly, if you look at the modern days, like we are very familiar with the unboxing these days. When you buy a computer or any other system, you can see that in the see this unboxing videos. What Gandhi unboxed India through a real field that's digital, as we see today. But Gandhi made this digitization in his mind. It was well illustrated in his mind, the understanding of India, when it was a distant realization for many people living in those days. This is the difference that Gandhi, you can understand from Gandhi and others. But this visualization of India, great visualization of India, I will argue, therefore, that it was a locational specific knowing or mapping of India. In the mental framework of Gandhi, that went a long way in the leader's visualization of India. So, a visualization, as we see today, the visualization is lacking. A visualization based on knowledge acquired through critical understanding, diversities, pluralities, differences is not seen today. But Gandhi visualized that from 1915 to 1917 or 1919, even after that, continued his journeys and travels. But Gandhi was not, away from strategies. As all of you know, Gandhi has always been criticized for initiating movements and against the colonial state and cancelling such engagements at his own will. We have instances like these in non-cooperation and civil disobedience, when Gandhi agreed to take a position of consenting to British ideas and proposals at a later time, when the movement was gaining some momentum. Was it the weakness of Gandhi, or shows his mental disposition, not a try to see in great leaders? The answer to this question is best discussed in a book written by one of the greatest historians of modern India, Prof. Chandra. In the Indian national movement, the long-term dynamics. He comes with a brilliant argument and equation for designing Gandhian positional oscillations through his equation of STS struggle. Struggle, choose, struggle. He develops it like any movement, like international movement with a huge mass of people participating in it, cannot go at a stretch in its full momentum. It needed temporal breaks. It needed to take the rest because a huge mass of people are participating in it. It needed to take the rest and then recuperate and strike back against the most powerful nation in the whole world in those times. Britain is not the present nation in those times. Britain was dominating the globe, and any movement against imperial tentacles and structures would be easily buttressed by the police, army, and a superior technology, both the railways and the gun factory. And guns used to talk for imperialism. In such a situation, the mass movement will have to take periodic withdrawals, which Professor Christlin Chandra calls as the truce with the empire. Like a sick man, recuperate, the movement will come back with renewed energy from an all-out effort in ousting, for renewing its energy for making an all-out effort in ousting the colonial government from the pivotal power system. I wish to point that it is Gandhi's idea that made him follow the ST strategy, for he had a clear idea about the majority of the poor masses in India, who were not even, having a meal for a day, while people were, eating boiled grass. This was a deplorable condition in India at those times. People were not having the health to fight this particular system of the British imperialism. How is it possible to fight the British in and out with these composite classes, diversified, caste-based, regionally, with different affiliations and entities, the rich and the middle, and the pauperized, the poor, people in a schematicized manner. So STS was the only possible option for Gandhi. So while he was following this particular strategy, what was in his mind was a war of position, the ideology followed by in his struggle against the fascist government. War of position. Because Britain was very well equipped with the system to defeat any kind of mass rebellions or protest movements with its technology, police force, and everything. Their ideology, they can shift to a war of maneuver, tactics to defeat the protest movement, the international movement. But Gandhi followed the war of position, and it became a principled position of Gandhi. And you can also see that this was not just a it was enmeshed with ideological motives that was logically suited for the subjugated masses of India in those times. Rebellions, armed uprisings, was ruled out by Gandhi, and he sensed that the British would go down in the case of a respectful people's movement based on a non-violent, classically resistant methodology through satyagraha and non-cooperation. And Gandhi was not the first to showcase non-cooperation with British India, for there are several good instances of tribal Adivasi population of India demonstrating an ideology similar to this while not cooperating with the forest reservation policies of the Indian government. Their protests having its origins in the forests and fringes of forests can be considered as rebellions and protests for recovery of their habitats, the lifeblood from the colonial usurper. And therefore, those ideologies were tied to specified ecologies. Some of the historians have sensed ecological nationalism in this, specific to ecological spaces, the idea of ecological nationalism. Gandhi, who was also an ecological man, reaffirmed his faith in the right of the Indian in his own land. And he protested against the colonial oppressive policy, fully understanding the Indian ecologies, specified the social ecologies that is different in different regions spread across India. And this does not mean that Gandhi was an environmentalist in the contemporary usage of the term. Some historians have argued that Gandhi was a proto-environmentalist, at the first stage of environmentalism in that sense. But he had fantastic ideas about the rural world and considered farmers as people with earth and climate conditions. So, in that sense, he was more oriented towards their problems. And his environmentalism, in that sense, is often seen by some scholars as a lopsided one, aligning with the rural and neglecting the urban world. But Gandhi was sure about the seriousness of the present problem in India and considered its amelioration as the primary agenda of the national movement. This was a position taking not based on a strategy, but based on the conviction of knowledge about the poor rural ecologies in India. There lies the ecological mind of Gandhi. And he promptly responded to several occasions when it was a question of the poor peasant in India. For example, you can see the starting of the Satyagraha in Champaran in 1917, which can be cited as an apt example for this. Gandhi understood that it is actually denied the right of the Indian peasant to cultivate a particular crop. And whether Gandhi was implicating at this stage that he was fighting against something like an ecological imperialism in that sense. Gandhi had sensed the ecologies. So Gandhi demanded that the farmers should have the right to cultivate food crops in their fields. Because he sensed that, in case of famines, because the commercialization of agriculture based on a monoculture would lead to shortage of food crops, that will definitely lead to famine, that will adversely affect the health of the Indians, the poor Indians. So this ecological understanding of India was enmeshed in a concern for the poor. That is why Gandhi raised this banner against the idea of monoculture plantations, which was to lead, to a fall in the production. And one other thing which I would like to cite at this particular, instance of my talk as the strategy of Gandhi, Gandhi demonstrated his body as a metaphor. He was representing himself as a poor Indian before the vast majority of the poor people in India. It is quite obvious that the body of Gandhi itself became a motive, a political motive that was fighting the inequality. And it's an inequality because of the British rule. It represented rural India and the poverty-stricken poor people of India and the world. And finally, you can see that Gandhi's body itself became an ideology. The fact of being an important component in raising support for Indian national movement. And you are familiar, most of you are familiar with the famous comment which Churchill made about Gandhi when he reached England for the second round of the conference of F McAvinchey. But Gandhi, on a subsequent occasion, retaliated by saying that your king is wearing more clothes, implicating that actually there is a front the economic exploitation, because there is a saying that India was clothing the world in the 18th and 19th centuries, while Indians had no clothes to wear. So Gandhi's sense is historical. But for these contemporary times, the Gandhian ideologies and strategies are again finding its reflection in movements from the fringes of the society, from margins of the society. The intellectuals are knowing that, academicians are knowing that, but when you see like movement, you can understand this from the very slogan that they made, Hamara now made Hamara that, self-rule in our villages. This means, taking up of a position of Gandhi, not to cooperate with the government which is against their right to live in India. This same thing happened before 1947 also. And you can see this particular reenactment of Gandhi's several of the environmental, I am citing these environmental movements because I am more familiar with that. You can see it in Chipko movement, you can see it in any water movements for water, you can see it in Narmada, you can see it in Apiku, any movement from any part of it, you can see it from the anti-dams and anti-mines, anti-mining movements in India. So Gandhi's ideology is still relevant, not to cooperate with any government which is against the basic ethics, the foremost ethics of allowing a person to live in a bed. More important, he becomes a spirited model for all the downtrodden and all the people. So Gandhi's memories will never fade away. He lives through memories these days. It cannot be defaced and it cannot be erased. Throwing tar or painting it with black coal in Gandhi statues, will not erase the monumental memories of Gandhi in the public. Every time it gets reinforced in the mind, memory. And one last thing I wish to tell you is that what was this kind of strategy that was followed by Gandhi? This I can narrate you from a statement that was made by
but we can't hear from this one.
Akhil Bilgrami, a great political philosopher and an expert and erudite scholar in Gandhian ideology. What was Gandhi's non-cooperation? Gandhi was talking about non-cooperation. Everyone is talking about non-cooperation. Akhil Bilgrami cites a personal experience from his life. It will be very interesting for you to understand what is non-cooperation. So Bilgrami was walking with his father by the side of a beach, and while they were walking, they found a purse, a wallet, on the road, which was having some amount in it. Some rupee notes were coming out of that. And Bilgrami's father asked Bilgrami, see, tell me, Akhil, why we should not pick it up? That means why we should not pick up this purse. And Bilgrami thought for a while and he answered, his father was annoyed. And he replied, why you said that? That is not a good act. Bilgrami immediately replied, if we don't pick it up, some others will pick it up. Then his father responded to him with a philosophical type of answer to a young boy. Bilgrami was only 12 years old at that time. His father responded, if we don't pick it up, then others will not pick it up. This is the mentality. So you have to prove yourself to others that you are not going to do the same act which others do, or you must think that others will not do this if you do not do this. So giving a moral lesson to Bilgrami in his young days, this was a great realization, a very revealing realization for Bilgrami. So this was Gandhi's non-cooperation ideology, as one can understand it from a life world experience. If Gandhi, in that sense, emerged or overcame a mentality, a mindset of the times of cooperating with a rule which was against the British, which was un-British and therefore anti-unity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Joseph. It was indeed very illustrious presentation by you. And you have also introduced many theoretical perspectives in your session, especially highlighting the idea of ecological nationalism, ecological identity, and trying to look into Gandhi as a ecological perspective. Thank you very much for that insightful presentation, sir. We will, for all the earlier speakers at one go. So now I am passing the session to Professor Channaveer. He will be briefing on, he will be moderating the discussion and also will have a follow-up session. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon. Am I audible? Am I audible?
I have stopped my presentation.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we had wonderful presentations so far from Don Rajendram sir, Rakesh ji, and Sebastian Joseph on various topics. I think we revisited Gandhi. The theme of finding relevance of Gandhi, I think it is not required. Gandhi is part of our life, part of our nation. Uh, I think we are just trying to reaffirm what our doubts or issues we have. We are trying to reconnect ourselves with the ideals of Gandhi and making Gandhi as ideals and principles, integrating in our personal life. As a social work student and teacher, I have, you know, reaffirmed the importance of his Satyagraha doctrine. We as social work students and teachers learn about social action. This Satyagraha has given a philosophy for social action to bring social change. Satyagraha is in its invented form, has created a dialogical society to free ourselves from conflicts, move towards consensus and conflict-free society, and also transform at the individual level to understand the other, which Gandhi used to refer. In the philosophy of Gandhi and also in the practice of, there is no position of enmity as such. It is always, he used to refer the other. I think that is what we need to reinvent and reintegrate in our social life, economic life, political life, and even including media. His Satyagraha, especially with regard to perception of injustice, dissemination of injustice, and leading to dialogue with the other, between the persons or groups having conflict with each other, and through dialogue, discussion, coming to some consensus, through negotiation, understanding each other's position and stance, and respecting the conflicting positions and leading through dialogue to reach a consensus. Satyagraha, the synonymous today, is like fasting. It is limited to fasting, which is not just, it is a means, not the end in itself. So it is an individual's weapon at the disposal of an individual or a group to contribute for a dialogical society, to transform from individual to the nation. So it's a very important and logically construed doctrine of Gandhi, which he contributed to the world. Although Satyagraha, non-cooperation, civil disobedience are considered as unconstitutional after the independence, but Satyagraha, non-violence remained part of our civic society. The civic consciousness, mobilization, making society more vibrant, the Satyagraha, non-violence movement, they have contributed a lot. So, in that perspective, uh, he never had any agenda as such, the agenda which we construe in some negative form. So his life, his work, his ideas, his practices, his activities, there was nothing to worry or be defensive or protective about it. And he himself was very open to the public. So, in that context, we can have some issues. You know, he had a lot of conflict, arguments with Veer Savarkar, with Ambedkar, with Subhash Chandra Bose on many occasions. There are many, discussions even now which are very prevalent that in the Pune Act, Gandhi and Ambedkar they keep against each other. That's one. Second, we again take a position and keep Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose, one against another. It may be Gandhi and Veer Savarkar also. I think these arguments happen in society from time and again. I think can I have some inputs from the resource persons on these issues? Rakesh ji, Sebastian, Rajendram, Martha.
Hello, am I audible? Hello. You have raised a very, very important issue today at this hour, this moment, and this time of India's history, where there are open act of killing even Gandhi. It's a very rare society where last 4-5 have been brandishing guns and shooting Gandhi. But Gandhi is not an unnatural day. Gandhi was attacked even when Gandhi was working. In 1940, I came across a newspaper article, small item, news item, of a judgment. It was referring to a judgment that and it was reporting that abusing Gandhi is not illegal in 1940. So the editor was Shama Prasad Moh, that newspaper called Hindustan. So Gandhi was attacked. Gandhi was attacked so much that he was even killed. So it is not unnatural that a person like Gandhi was not attacked, was attacked only today and not tomorrow. But what you are pointing out is a very important issue that he was attacked, he was debated, a lot of debates are still on. To me as a historian, and somebody who also looks at as learning from all of you communication, to me as a historian, Gandhi is essentially, if you see, was leading a political movement. And in a political movement, he was bringing something which is historically brought by very few people. And that is a very, very important notion of means as important, even more important than the end. Now, put it against larger political theories and larger political understanding across the world. In fact, the first time he was bringing a mass movement in a manner which is non-violent, which has very rarely taken place in history. At a time when, in the 1930s, if you remember, Mao was raising a movement against the Japanese and against the feudal order with with avowedly violent means. He was declaring it to be violent. Here is the man who was, in fact, resigning from the movement in 1922 and saying that I want to keep it violent and non-violent. So therefore, he was at the center. He was leading a political movement, and therefore, if we see that in that sense, Gandhi in that sense as leading the largest mass movement through a means which is non-violent, we understand many of these things in that. So those who are attacking him is attacking or debating with him are debating about the tactics, that it is not the tactics. And he was sticking to his tactics, tactics, strategy, ideology, whatever you call it. The second point, as I was mentioning, who are we as Indian? Who is Indian people? And this is where his contribution was to extend the national movement frontier of creating a nation. As somebody said, if nation has to be concrete, it is the most concrete entity of a nation is its people. So therefore, who are the Indian people? The Chinese define, Mao defined, or Chinese define Chinese people, but there are a huge chunk of homogeneous population. It's an enormous diversity. Enormous diversity is so huge that at any moment, even today, we are not able to handle that diversity with respect. Sri Lanka, Rajendram is here, he will vouch for it. Sri Lanka could not manage a single diversity, that is Tamil population, and it is fighting a war for us over years. So therefore, the biggest contribution of Gandhi in our life is to tell us that we should be Indian in this sense, and that he followed the national movement. The idea of people that this diversity can be given a definition which is so malleable and yet so concrete, and the means to achieve that has to be democracy. Gandhi was committed to democracy without even using the word democracy. He was committed to democracy in such a manner that there's oft-quoted example that my teachers taught us, and we always refer to this, when the three communist members objected, protested against, in fact voted against the Quit India resolution in Bombay in August 1942, where the entire thousands of people were ready and they voted against. It was Gandhi who supported them. He said, I am so happy that they voted against them, and he said the resolution of the Congress. And then he said something marvelous, that they have learned the lessons of the national movement. Today, you say a single word against some powerful leader and you may be killed, you may be trolled, your life will be made miserable, as we are all understanding how things are going. So therefore, the debate against Gandhi is about the method, about who we are, about how to take the national movement forward. And for example, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and debate, this has a very important connotation. Subhash and Gandhi debate is a very significant in the sense Gandhi is saying this is the way to go forward. If you don't want, I am ready to resign from. I'm sidelined. You run. Subhash Chandra Bose, for example, wanted to send an ultimatum to the British in 1938-39 that we will launch a movement. Gandhi said consistently that we are not ready for the movement. Despite that, Subhash Chandra Bose goes ahead. The second term, he becomes the president, and his agenda was
that we sent ultimatum and we will fight the battle. Gandhi said, we are not ready. People are not ready for the movement. Subhash was insistent. Then Gandhi said, okay, fine, you launch the movement, but then don't ask me to be there. Subhash's consistent argument is that you have to lead the movement. Now, Gandhi would say, and like anyone who now understands, Gandhi said, it is if you are launching a movement against our opposition that I don't want people to launch the movement right now. You launch it, but I'm not going to lead a movement which I don't believe to be launched. And this is the crux of the debate on which Subhash has issued letters and accusations against other senior leaders and called them right-wing leaders. This is when the leaders resigns from the working committee, and Gandhi asked Subhash to form his own working committee, that if you believe that movement has to be launched, to constitute a working committee and launch a movement. It is here that Subhash resigns. Now, see the beauty of the national movement. That's why I was talking about solidarity. That leaders imagine the kind of thing could happen in any political party. Subhash, when he leaves the party, he launches his Azad Hind Fauj in Singapore, and the first proclamation when he forms the provisional government, the first announcement from the radio was, Bapu, the father of the nation, we need your blessing. So the debate was there. Gandhi did not budge from his position. And because he was leading a political movement, he had an ideology, he has a strategy, he needs to reaffirm that. But he was giving the space to other to bring. He said, "He bring a working committee, launch the movement. I'm there, but I won't lead a movement which I don't believe in." In the same manner, the debate on Bhagat Singh's acquittal, and it has been consistently brought in by very radical sections in India that Gandhi did not seek Bhagat Singh's acquittal. Now, apart from any other thing, Bhagat Singh himself would have felt insulted because when his father went to jail and said, "I'm writing the letter for the British to acquit you," he in fact sent his father and asked the jailer not to allow his father to meet him. Even Bhagat Singh would not have asked live Gandhi to appeal for his acquittal. So there are commitments, ideological, political, means, and in that sense, therefore, Gandhi and the debates are about the methods of fighting the British, the colonial system, the method of fighting the social issue of untouchability, for example, and the rights to who we are. Who we are. When Gandhi could not prevent the partition because the British were there. The new kind of historical production has come on, a lot of work on partition and all. Most of the NRI population, for example, or Oxford and Cambridge and other people, including Akhil Birigani and all, they talk about partition quite often or historically. In the sense, they removed the British from the sea and they said the Congress is responsible, Gandhi is responsible, but there is empire, the British Empire. So the British would play a different game in Sri Lanka, they would play a different game in Burma. Wherever colonialism has left, they left the society divided and they would battle for the next 100 or 200 years to back. But Ireland, they left partition, Vietnam, they left partition, any colonialism. Lebanon is still fighting, Palestine is still fighting. Here, Gandhis and Nehrus and all, they are trying to protect that partition. Gandhi would tell British that you leave us. British would say, if we leave, you Hindus and Muslims will fight forever, which we are somehow trying to prove today. But Gandhi would say, we have lived here for thousands of years, hundreds of years. We will fight. We will fight like brothers fight with each other. But we have always fought and we have always lived. So leave it to anarchy, leave us to anarchy, or you leave. He did not want partition to be done by the British. And finally, British did the partition because Jinnah wanted partition first and then leave. Gandhi wanted. Now, even then, he would talk. He said, we have, when the partition was, and he asked Indians not to accept partition in their heart. He said partition is a political act, it will be a legal act, it will have passport, visa, but in your heart you don't accept partition. That Hindus and Muslims can have two nations, don't accept in your heart. And this is the beauty of Gandhian strategy. So what he does, he goes to Noakhali in Bengal, where the partition riots start taking place in Punjab. The entire Indian military, British military was there, and they could not stop 5 to 10 million deaths. In Gandhi in Bengal, Mountbatten himself had to admit that he had a command in these, that the wholesale massacre could not take place in Bengal. And that is now trying to be fomented, in the some sense later that people are divided. So therefore, the question you raised is a fantastic question, fabulous question at this moment of our history, where we were meant to feel every day in our heart that we are divided. Gandhi said, no, we are not divided. Feel in your heart that you are not partition. Just because you are a Hindu in Punjab and you are a Hindu or Muslim in Bengal, you feel that you are two different nations. That cannot happen because that is a later thing. He would debate with Jinnah in 1944 for 22 days. That tell me, how is that the Hindus and Muslims are two different nations? He would debate, discuss, and come back and write later that what you are telling me as the future Pakistan, it makes me shiver in pain and fear that what I could see the future in front of me. Gandhi was right in any sense. Therefore, the debates with each individual, each political ideology are relevant even today. Gandhi is attacked even today. But the strength of Gandhi, as Sebastian and all others have suggested, is the fact that his ideology, like his politics, is so open, so that we rarely have a movement in the world history where the movement was open, the accounts were open, the membership was open, the leader's house is open. And therefore, India is lucky to have an open democracy. And therefore, all the meetings of Congress or national movement used to have it open. First thing that Gandhi and this indication of his openness was that the first thing that Gandhi does when he joins Congress and the national movement, he prohibits going underground. Because it is very easy for people to go underground. The administration, the police, the army will therefore victimize the family member, friends, and this was in the revolutionary groups, a tendency was to go underground, hide. Gandhi would, because you have to take responsibility of your political action. Today, a large number of political groups have come with a different name, different shape, thousands of them. They will come in one shape, attack you on the net with fake Facebook, and then they vanish. This is what is again Gandhi gives us an indication that this is a democracy for openness, and again the only antidote to that fake news, to the misinformation, the hate campaign is again an open politics. Therefore, what you suggested, the debate, Savarkar Gandhi debate, Ambedkar Gandhi debate, Subhas Gandhi debate, there are many more. The Communist Gandhi, communists were literally even today, communists have not accepted Gandhi's strategy because communists say we are the party of the masses, but the masses were with Gandhi. So this debate remains as to what constitutes Gandhi's politics that the masses goes to him. So with this note, I must thank you for raising a very important question of today's India.
We have a question.
Unmute, Dr. Rajendran.
Yeah, Sri Lanka is still going through a war in the sense that there is still no peace. And So there is, they have taken up the initiative to rewrite the constitution, but how they will do it, and it's still a very big question among the people. I think the wounds are not healed, and that is probably the difficulty to start writing a constitution. But then the wounds need to be healed. I think it. So unfortunately, the people who took the war and who believe that they have won the war, I don't think they'll be able to heal the wounds. Because healing the wounds is not the same as winning a war. And that because there is no such thing as a victory in a war. So Sri Lanka is in a very, very difficult position, and unfortunately India is in no good place to be able to be of help. Because from what we heard today, India probably is having its own war that's going on underneath, and which is not willing to face what is in front. So it's a very sad position, but I don't know. It's very difficult to predict what will happen, but then the people are really very concerned and very unsettled, and they have, because the government also is asking for full authority and basically to be able to do whatever they want, and people are at a loss what to do, and they have divided us very drastically as the majority and the minority. And once you have that division, it's very difficult to talk about healing or talk about peace. So that's what.
Thank you.
What should I do, sir? What thanks for?
So indeed, your presentation was really thought-provoking and which really inspired us to take up more strategies.
So much less not take further price. Don't take it. Just next move to sir. Yes.
Communication is actually communion and community, and I think that is the base of all Gandhi's ideology and philosophy. And that though he has not he uses ahimsa, but actually ahimsa contains this unconditional love that is that came in such a negative form, but it is really a very positive energy that he was talking about. So I don't, he might, I'm sure that he has a theory of communication as connecting, communing, building community and all that is there. But he didn't, he was not writing about a theory or talking about a theory, but he's talking about in the political sphere to build this community. Even the new nation that he was trying to build, he wanted to be a community that people come together and they recognize each other in all these principles. Is that, does that answer your question?
I got it. Thank you so much.
Dr. Kiran. Yes, 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 sir. Yes, sir. Please carry on. Yes, 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 sir. Yes, sir. Please.
Hello. Yeah, Dr. Rami, am I audible, madam? Yes, yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Because it's a very meaningful session. I just want to ask one question from Dr. Sebastian. So, thank you, Dr. Sebastian, because you referenced our mode example of not taking the birds. Thank you very much for that. The major theme of this conference is the relevance of Gandhi, because as a political science practitioner, so I feel that today I quote from the book which is written by the short note on Gandhi. So today I think that liberal democracy is shrinking. So maybe if we want to strengthen that liberal democratic theory, I think we need to go to Gandhi, because that is a very important thing which I feel, because in an all over world, so that democratic theory is facing major problems today. So if we want to strengthen that democracy, I think we need to go to Gandhi. So I think the same thing was argued by the famous writer, right? That Shashmata on Gandhi. So what is your stand on that?
Thank you, thank you, Dr. Kiran, for the question. It's a very meaningful question. See, one must understand how Gandhi looked at modernity and the notions of liberty and equality. One has to get a contextual background picture of Gandhi's notions towards modernity. Gandhi did not completely rejected modernity, but he was critical about the notions and enmeshed in liberty, because a liberty that would lead to usurpation of somebody's right, even when eulogizing a democratic form of governance, is most dangerous. This was sensed by Gandhi. Gandhi was not against the ideals of liberty, he fully endorsed that. But when liberty is the idea, the notion of liberty, when that is translated into liberalization, things like that, what the world is facing now. Because like a Philippine economist once said during the seminar, I forgot the place, but it was a Philippine economist. He said, now, thanks to liberalization, thanks to a boy in India, maybe a boy in Asia, a third world country can get a pair of Nike shoe at a reduced rate. But the ultimate truth is that his father will lose his job. So there is some connection between this inequality, what you call the forces of capitalism and industrialization and all notions of liberty, and they are channelized through structured forms of regimentalized structured forms of use of capital and technology may adversely affect the right to the common man. That was the implication of Gandhi, pointing out that. Rest of the thing, I fully concur with what he said. Thank you, Dr. Kiran.
Yeah. I just, quote the book, the short note on Ahim Swaraj, from the Bhikkhu Parekh. Yeah, that's the.
Can I come on this? Can I join on this?
Please, sir. Please.
Dr. Kiran has asked an important question from an academic's question, that whether to rescue liberal theory, liberal democratic theory, we have to go to Gandhi. But this is a paradox in which we academics live. We want to strengthen the theory, whereas Gandhi was strengthening the human being. So what is the priority has to be fixed. Our priority today in India or Sri Lanka is to strengthen the poor, the women, the Dalit, the tribal, the marooned, the people who are internally forced migrant from each other, the labor. So now, how to do that? Do we need a theory to do that, or and in that sense, liberal democratic theory, in many sense, for the last 100 years, actually has become the antagonistic to many of the ameliorative projects. So, in the name of the same liberal democratic theory, the Americans and the West has imposed this notion of democracy in the Middle East, and you see what is happening in the Middle East. You see, the same liberals, in fact, Tony Duke, one of the finest historians who died recently, one of the finest historians of this century, he wrote a piece when the liberals in US supported the Iraq war of Bush, and he called them Bush's useful idiots. So quite often the liberals turned out to be the what is called Bush's idiots, and you can use, but the original use of this term was Lenin's useful idiots about the French intellectuals in 1940s and 20s. So therefore, in what you are witnessing in India is also an emergence of liberal historians, liberal political scientists, liberal. But you see, where are they located? They are located in the very niche areas of private universities, Ashokas, and Kriya, and what kind of. This is a section which writes history, which are always in the TV. Now, see what the questions they are raising. They're not questions, they're raising the questions of employment generation, which has stopped. The industrial sectors have collapsed. Regional development as an ideal has been given up. So, and this is not just 2, 3, 4 years. Not the way I would put this problem is not to rescue the liberal democracy by bringing Gandhi, but I will bring Gandhi to rescue humanity, and then the theory will follow. See, the agenda is slightly different. And in that sense, Gandhi, even in 1907 to 1920s, he because Indians were fighting against the liberals. Now suddenly a new kind of liberals in India has emerged. Say we are liberal. Basically, liberal in British India were the defenders of colonialism. So Indians, in fact, fought against the liberalism. Liberalism is ultimately an economic theory, not about liberty. It's an economic theory of liberal world, which never exists. So similarly, Gandhi went, and in fact many communitarians which have many communitarians which have come over the last 30, 40 years and have spoken against liberalism in the West itself. Gandhi, in that sense, if you see political theory, he was he was closer to Tolstoy. He was closer to the anarchists of the Russians, Narodniks. No, they did not want the state to come in because the colonial state was a very dangerous state. Now, what we are doing in the name of aspirational society, in the name of rich, we are creating states as one of the most dangerous things in the world. Sri Lanka will be, there. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's thank you very much, Professor Mahalakshmi, for this question. I refer to NBA because NBA in that sense, it's a long, with a long span of time. For you can witness, you can see certain replications. So replications from real life world experiences, where exactly communicating to a Gandhi strategy. That's why Especially in environmental movements, this particular entry is considered to be the environmental because the age of environmentalism in India, as environmentalists will say. But what you said is correct. There are a lot of movements in Kerala in my part. For example, poor people's against sand mining. There is an individualized movement. For example, one single lady, Malika Amani, she fought on her own, way. When others cooperated with her, she cooperated with the lobbies in Kerala. None of the political parties came for the help of this particular lady, but what she did was that she performed a particular coup, that is Pongal. She did this ritualistic practice in order to stop the lorries coming through the road to, for loading for loading and unloading the sand collected from the river. So that was a single protest. But you may not be knowing about Gandhi ideology, but it was like that. Again, it's the related issue of Mylama's fight against this co-colonization of water. Colonization, later we see co-colonization. There also we can see the literal rationality activists through the ideology which you can see in Gandhi. And again, several women in Kasaragod district fought against this enthusiasm. Again, you know that this enthusiasm became an important pest control, pesticide in that part, which led to the spread of cancer and other deformity diseases in many of their children, especially in children. So there are a large number of fight against this particular, there are also river protection groups in Kerala, who all, large number of river protection groups in Kerala, which they also perform a lot of, activities connected with this, so containing this particular menace of sand mining. And all these signifies in some sense, what we understand as the non-cooperation, not to cooperate with the prevailing or the dominant ideology of what you call development, notions of development. In all these, you can understand the traces of the Gandhian struggle.
School of Social Sciences and Head and Professor of Department of Psychology. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, audible. Please check it. Hello. Thank you, Dr. Remia.
You unmute the button. It's here, it is fine.
Just ask. Audible, am I audible?
Yeah, it's audible.
It's coming. Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Remia, for inviting me to the Vote of Thanks. I take this opportunity to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Maheshwaraiah, for organizing today's event more meaningfully and with two events, starting with dedicating a national flag to the nation, as well as first time, it's the first time that our university is inviting resource person from abroad, and with a lot of preparations, we have identified 4 good speakers on this occasion. So I thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor for making this event a successful. And also I extend my thanks to our Vice Chancellor, Professor R Naik, who is always with us, with the Vice Chancellor and our team to support and to make all the arrangements. And also our Registrar, Professor Mushtaq Ahamed Patel, who is there with us for the time, and he was also spending a lot of time for preparing to make this event successful. And I must especially thank our speakers, Dr. Ronald, and for talking on bringing Gandhi to life. And it was an inspiring talk. And all my colleagues sitting here and who are not here for attending the sessions online also have enjoyed this session. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and spending your precious time, I think in the midnight, to address our faculty and students. And I have to thank Dr. Rakesh to talk on the national movement national movement and talking about coming of an aspirational society for his thought-provoking uh, ideas and talks.
Yes.
So thank you, Professor Rakesh, for accepting our invitation and motivating our ex-students and teachers and other participants in this occasion. And I must also thank Dr. Christlin Rajendram. I can say he was my teacher, and I have learned some sessions from Dr. Rajendram on nonviolent communication. And you have also found that non-violence day, non-violence communication has a lot of relevance. I think most of the time in our day-to-day life, we communicate to people violently. Okay. So thank you very much for spending your time for educating and introducing the concept to our university community. What is non-violent communication for the first time? So we really enjoyed your session. Thank you very much, sir. And also speaking by Dr. Sebastian Joseph from Aluva UC College. And I think, I don't know whether he mentioned today, Mahatma Gandhi visited his college. Okay, yes, Mahatma Gandhi visited his college, and he is from that great, very important and very popular college in Kerala. And thank you very much for talking about making of Gandhi strategies and ideologies. And thank you very much, sir, for your inspirational talk. And I must also thank the person behind this all events, Dr. Channaveer R.M. He is our CU, Central University of Karnataka, Gandhian.
Yes,
Right.
he is a Gandhi.
And I always say that if anyone wants to impress him, if anyone wants to pass his entrance exam, if they write well, they answer well about Gandhi, definitely they are going to get a seat for admission for PhD or any work can be done. Right. So he is living like a Gandhian in our university, right? And I must thank Professor Channaveer, and also I must also thank his colleague, a big team with uh, teachers like Dr. Ramia, and she's the deputy director of DSW, and Dr. Shivamurthy, Dr. Srinivas, and Chitkala, and other research scholars from the department who have worked day and night to make this event more successful. And also I thank all other special invitees, participants, students, our teaching staff, non-teaching staff who are attending this session. And also finally, I must also thank the technical staff who have spent a lot of time to make this program alive through YouTube and other social media, and Department of Mass Communication, and our system analyst, and Sohib, Vinod, and Martina. Okay, and there are many people who have really spent their time to make this program more successful and making it available to the public across the globe. So once again, I thank all. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Now Dr. Channaveer is known as CUK Gandhi. No, we have Gandhi Das, Channaveer Gandhi. No, I think we should really appreciate your team. Because 3-4 days you have done. The brochure came only yesterday. So I protested, I resisted, I went to court to bring a stay order. All the things I couldn't. Right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all.
It was honor.
Yes.
Let's go on to thank towards the end. Is there?
I have.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. We need to
Stop.
WhatsApp
group. Yeah. I have confusion. Live stream is stop. Check it.